He's immensely seductive. Quite sure he's right. Obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
What? This is the end game.
All right, everybody. It is Monday, February 17th, 2025, the 29th day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. Apologies for the slightly late start today. A little disheveled. But it's all going to be okay. We're going to get it right. We're going to be there. People are asking, where are you? I'm right here. Don't you worry. I will always be here eventually. Snowcat operator already dropping free subscriptions for people in the chat. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're starting another week, big weekend. Last weekend we had the Super Bowl to capture everyone's attention, and this week we had a range of bread and circuses events. We had the Four Nations face-off in hockey, and there were 3 fights between the United States and Canada in the first 9 seconds, which means all of those fights were planned, which is especially strange. And I watch a lot of hockey, or at least I used to. I haven't really watched that much in the last few seasons. But sometimes they'll plan to fight before the face-off, usually not at the beginning of the game unless there's some bad blood there. So we are supposed to believe that there's all this bad blood between the U.S. team and the Canadian team, or these various players in the NHL. But it's not even the teams that they would normally be on. So that's a little weird. They kind of just planned this so that they could capture the attention of sports fans who might not be into international hockey. And then the U.S. beat Canada pretty soundly, but Russia's not there. It made me think of the big final scene in the movie Gladiator when the Joaquin Phoenix character has Russell Crowe's character, Maximus, injured before he goes out to fight, like giving the unnecessary advantage. I'm not saying the U.S. team couldn't beat the Russian team. Maybe they could. But we've had this thing since the beginning of Putin's very brutal invasion where we pretend that Russians don't exist. Like the Russian tennis players, they don't even get the Russian flag next to their name. It's all so silly. So we had that. We had the NBA All-Star Weekend, the slam dunk contest, and the three-point contest. Who cares? And then Saturday Night Live's 50th anniversary special. Didn't watch any of it. Who cares? And then Donald Trump kind of had his own version of, he kind of had his own response. And his response was bigger. And as we saw last weekend in the Super Bowl, you put Donald Trump up on camera, everybody cheers. You put Taylor Swift up on camera, everybody boos. The polls, the election results, all of it, forget about it. Fake numbers, they can make up whatever they want, tell us whatever they want. But you get these live events in front of actual Americans, and you get to have the reaction to Trump or the reaction to Taylor Swift. And right there, you see the public mandate on display. We've talked about it over and over again for the last couple of years at this point. Here is Donald Trump's entrance to the 500. People are experiencing in reality, in real time, Look at that plane. There it goes. And he was there with his granddaughter. He took a lap. Is this officially the Beast? I think it is.
It was a great sight to see all the folks in the stands jumping up, grabbing phones, grabbing
Look at
cameras,
that.
and Air Force One did a flyby of the Speedway before landing.
You know, we're very fortunate, Kevin, you and I, this sport's given us everything in our lives. Very fortunate to have a sport that somebody as powerful as the President of the United States of America wants to come and be a part of it, be present. It means a lot to the sport of NASCAR and everybody involved.
It does mean a lot.
All right. So we have the distraction-oriented bread and circuses reaffirm the central narrative and all the cultural norms that have been on display for the last 4+ years, but really a lot longer. And we have all of that stuff breaking down the mainstream impression of what our country is and what it means and what our culture is. And then we have Trump displaying what it really has been the whole time without that false reality layer on top of it, or maybe the new reality. I tend to think it's not that new. I tend to think that this is what it's been and what it would have always been understood as being. Did I say too many versions of the word be in that sentence? Without that projection from the media, from the regime and its propaganda apparatus. And I just thought that was kind of an interesting comparison. And we're going to continue to make that comparison, I imagine, as we get through the next weeks and months of this, because so much of what the media is communicating now is that Donald Trump is going overboard and kind of overestimating his influence and the power of his office, and he's grasping for so much more than what he actually has. And there's not that many ways to counter that with the level of media control. And of course, the media control has been diminished over time, and it's not what it once was. But I think that he's trying to make the point that he's got the whole country on his side. There's always going to be those stragglers, no doubt about it. The 5 to 10% who are never going to come around, and then the 15 or 20% above that who will just kind of go wherever the wind blows. But there's not a lot of pushback culturally, or I mean, I'm not in a liberal city and out and social like I once was, so I don't have the on the ground impression right up in my face like that. Maybe some of you in the chat do. You can let me know how it seems for you, but there's not a lot of pushback, and that's because he has this overwhelming mandate. Now, there was some freak out over the weekend. Donald Trump initially posted on X, formerly Twitter, and on Truth Social, of course, a quote that is often attributed to Napoleon: "He who saves his country does not violate any law." And as of now, a little more than 48 hours later, nearly 230 million views of that post on X, formerly Twitter. He followed it up the next day, highlighting a post from a journalist, I guess, named Logan Hall, the famous painting of Napoleon on his horse. He who saves his country violates no law. And as I said, there's some dispute about whether or not that's actually from Napoleon, but it makes you think about what it means to lead a nation and what it means for the leader of a nation to follow the laws of that nation. And ultimately, you know, it kind of can lead you back to some of the discussion from Major Jason Lowry's Soft War and some of what I really took away from that book upon first being exposed to it a few years ago, which is the difference between a projection of abstract power based on rank and title, words on paper, and actual power as it's being used and projected, and who possesses actual power and what it means to have actual power in the real world versus the projection of abstract power. If the laws of a nation cannot restrain the people leading that nation, the people with actual power, then the laws of the nation are pretty much null and void. If there's no enforcement mechanism that is capable of overriding the people violating the power as it's projected in the abstract sense, then all that ultimately matters is the real power. And Lowry uses that to explain, among other things, the difference between proof of work and proof of stake. And so, as you might imagine, any time Donald Trump even hints at exercising the power that is constitutionally afforded his office as president, the mainstream goes crazy. The New York Post, of course, is a right-of-center outlet, so they're mostly reporting on the liberal meltdown. This is almost the mirrored version of Republicans' pounce, as Dan Bongino has discussed so often over the years. New York Post from yesterday. President sparks liberal meltdown for sharing conservative quote. Trump wants to be a dictator. That's what they're saying. So some of this reaction here, it's always just kind of funny, poking fun at those who would melt down easily. We told you Donald Trump wants to be a dictator. Well, it is now his official position that he can break any law he wants if he deems it necessary. Well, no. I do not recall any point at which Donald Trump has violated his constitutional authority as president, and that's ultimately the real and only point that matters, because that is the actual law of the land, and anything built above that and over top of that does not carry the same weight as the Constitution would. And of course, we are in a post-constitutional period. It's quite possible that we are under some form of military government and have been for at least a few years and maybe a long time. And we discussed a bunch of this on Saturday night on Devolution Power Hour. So if you want the extended discussion of all that, you can head there. A user called Angry Staffer said, yes, this is some weird shit. He's getting ready to do something really effing illegal. I'm always entertained by these people because they actually have no idea what's happening whatsoever. They never seem to know what is going on in any context that might be relevant, but they are still predicting exactly what Donald Trump is going to do. Have they ever been correct? Ever? No. Let's continue with some of this reaction. It's so funny. Richie Torres, an actual illegitimate congressman, said Donald Trump seems to believe he can do whatever he wishes in the name of saving the country. And yes, actually, if you have the full mandate of the people, as he shows us again and again and again, it turns out that he does have the ability to do whatever he wants and whatever he needs in the name of saving the country. And I don't know if it came up this weekend, but at various times over the past 4 weeks of Donald Trump being president, publicly recognized as president once again, it's become clear even to these sorts of communists that the military is on Donald Trump's side as well. And that's more readily explainable when you are the commander-in-chief and publicly recognized as such than it was over the last 4 years. But at this point, it's undeniable. Torres went on, in our constitutional republic, the means matter more than the ends. The U.S. Constitution trumps the policy preferences of President Trump. And if we were operating under the Constitution, all of that would be true. It doesn't much matter right now. It especially doesn't matter if Donald Trump is not actually violating any of what's in the Constitution. Now, these people believe that the Constitution means something that it totally doesn't, and they believe that their perception of all the laws that rest somewhere above the Constitution on a different layer are also part of the Constitution, and that what the courts say about the Constitution is the Constitution. But it's not. The Constitution is the words in the Constitution. Canadian law professor, why would that matter? This is, without exaggeration, one of the worst statements ever made by a sitting U.S. president. Well, who cares, Canadian, until you are officially the 51st state? Who cares? Shifty Schiff, spoken like a true dictator. One of the Krasenstein brothers, and we might actually have two Krasenstein mentions in this here podcast. He said this is literally a quote attributed to Napoleon Bonaparte, right before he orchestrated a coup, seized absolute power, and crowned himself emperor in a defiance of democracy. Well, I don't think that that's exactly how Napoleon rose to power. And of course, all of that was after the French Revolution and Robespierre chopping off heads. So, I mean, who cares? And then Bill Kristol. This reads better in the original German. We can leave it there for now. All right, Bill Kristol, you are a neocon. You are a descendant of that same regime. So you talking about how it sounds better in the original German while claiming for yourself the victimhood and oppression of that Nazi regime who partnered with the very Zionists you now support. It's very difficult to take Bill Kristol seriously with anything, but especially with that stuff. Donald Trump moved to this domain yesterday, and a lot of people were getting in touch with me about this. He said the 14th Amendment right of American citizenship never had anything to do with modern-day gate crashers, illegal immigrants who break the law by being in our country. It had everything to do with giving citizenship to former slaves. Our founding fathers are, quote, spinning in their graves, end quote. Interesting use of quotations. At the idea that our country can be taken away from us. No nation in the world has anything like this. Our lawyers and judges have to be tough and protect America. And of course, they would have never supported anything, the founding fathers, that would have given our country away to foreigners, to a foreign regime. But unfortunately, that's already happened. The usurpation by the foreign regime happened at least 160 years ago. You could say that it happened 213 years ago. You could say that it happened 250 years ago, and you'd probably be right in all of those cases. And that's really the question is, when did the usurpation really take hold? When did it become more the foreign regime occupation than it was a constitutional republic or whatever it was prior, a federation, a confederation of these several states with an organizing body that would make sure that dealings among and between the states were effective and that the states could collectively call together their militias and defend the country. So all these very interesting issues coming right up to the fore, and it's been kind of the underlying fundamental theory of this podcast over the last few years that Donald Trump is returning the United States of America back to the roots described in that constitutional republic, in those founding documents, and expressed by the founders, not only in the Constitution, but also according to the principles expressed by those who did not want to ratify the Constitution. They did not want an expansive, centralizing federal government to have this sort of power because they knew from history, and they probably knew from what the regime was trying to accomplish at that very moment, what hazards were present among those who wanted to see the more powerful centralized federal government, especially Alexander Hamilton, which makes it so interesting that over the last decade or so, I don't know when exactly it came out, we could check with the machine, but it doesn't matter. The Broadway play Hamilton, where they basically had Alexander Hamilton be appropriately gay, but also a rapper, And he was then reframed as the most important father of our country. It's going to be the Hamilton way, the strong, powerful, centralized federal government. A Rumble rant's already 2,000 Xmas Barbie. All right. Well, 24 years of Christmas celebrations. Oh, no, the 2000, that would be, if you counted the year 2000 as well, then that would be 25 whole Christmas Barbies here. $20, awesome show. Thank you very much. And Snowcat just making it rain with gift subscriptions. I hope you guys are all having a blast over there in the chat. So Donald Trump is Napoleon now. Is that what we're being told? We are all supposed to be scared of Donald Trump being dictator. He was only going to be dictator on day one. And on day one, he was not really dictator and has not been dictator since then, although he is exercising executive authority not to overstep the constitutional bounds of the authority vested in him as president, but to dismantle all the unconstitutional parts of our bureaucratic state. And we are going to deal with that in full after we get through some foreign policy stuff. Now, on Friday, we talked about the denuclearization efforts. Donald Trump had been discussing those in the Oval Office. By the way, today is President's Day. So happy President's Day to the president. And of course, the communists are out there fretting about his dictatorial power and wondering if maybe this shouldn't be called President's Day anymore because some of these presidents, we just don't want to celebrate them. So silly. These people are nuts. But I guess all this symbolic stuff means so much to them, of course. So here is Donald Trump talking about denuclearization. Wow. Sometimes he can't say it. Sometimes I can't say it. Sometimes no one can say it. Denuclearization.
Less money. We're going to spend a lot less money. And I know they're going to do it. They agreed to it. We were talking about denuking, denuking. And President Putin and I agreed that we were going to do it in a very big way. There's no reason for us to be building brand new nuclear weapons. We already have so many you could destroy the world 50 times over, 100 times over. And here we are building new nuclear weapons, and they're building nuclear weapons, and China's building nuclear weapons, and China's trying to catch up because, you know, they're very substantially behind, but within 5 or 6 years, they'll be even. And we're all spending a lot of money that we could be spending on other things that are actually, hopefully, much more productive. Hopefully, there'll never be a time when we need those weapons. If there's ever a time when we need nuclear weapons, like the kind of weapons that we're building and that Russia has and that China has to a lesser extent, but will have, that's going to be a very sad day. That's going to be probably oblivion.
It would be sad, especially if the world was destroyed 50 times over or 100 times over or 1,000 times over or 1,000,000 billion times over. It would be huge. And nobody wants that to happen. Thank goodness it's not going to happen. We talked quite a bit about nuclear weapons and nuclear energy on Friday because there was that very dangerous attack at the long 40 years inactive nuclear power plant at Chernobyl. So Friday evening, the reason I bring all this up again, Friday evening, CNN published this article, and I found it so very amusing. The freak out is amusing. The substance of it is amusing. It's just so silly. And I've made this point in the podcast before. If the United States and China and Russia can denuclearize, these are the three global superpowers These are our two greatest adversaries. They're not like our allies in Europe or the British Commonwealth nations or the Five Eyes nations or little Israel down there in the Middle East, our greatest ally of all time. These are our adversaries. If we were going to blow up people, that's who we would blow up. So we have nukes, they have nukes, and we're all going to get rid of our nukes so that no one blows anybody up and we don't destroy the world 50 times over or maybe 100 times over. We're going to leave that for climate change. Climate change is going to do that anytime now. There's supposedly nuclear material in the hands of other countries, nuclear weapons, dirty bombs. We used to hear about dirty bombs all the time. A terrorist is going to get a dirty bomb. South Park told us that Hillary Clinton was hiding a suitcase nuke in her sniz. A snook was in her sniz. That's what we were told. Look up sniz if you want. Will you find a definition? I don't know. Can you think of what it means yourself? Unfortunately, yes. So we're going to disarm, and China's going to disarm, and Russia's going to disarm, and then the only people capable of blowing the world up 50 or 100 times over will be other adversaries. India, Pakistan, North Korea, Iran, various rogue nations and terror groups. Got to have something for Mission Impossible movies to be written about. There's got to be nukes somewhere. And if the United States and Russia and China denuclearize and get rid of all their nukes, then the only people that'll have nukes are smaller nations and terrorist organizations. And then they could basically threaten us all with Armageddon. Unless we did what they wanted, we would be handing all of our power over to whoever has these nukes. And it makes you think that nukes don't exist. I know it's a crazy conspiracy theory and all, but someone's going to have to explain me the logic. If it's not that. Ron in the chat says, Happy Dictator Day. Well, Happy Dictator Day to you. Mike Irons said the nicest thing I've ever heard. You are the best podcaster alive. I finally found my replacement for Rush Limbaugh. Well, thank you. That's about as nice a pat on the back as you could ever get. So let's go to the CNN article. Trump officials fired nuclear staff, not realizing they oversee the country's weapons stockpile. Sources say, well, oh no. Who's going to be in charge of denuclearizing if the officials overseeing the country's weapons stockpile don't work there anymore? Sounds dangerous. By the way, why is this under CNN Climate? Seems like the wrong section. Maybe they should have CNN Global Destruction as a, oh man, leave it to me to pull up the version that is the pay-only version. Hit the wrong link. This is the archived version. And, for those of you who might not know this because you haven't listened to my show that long, you haven't seen anybody else tell you about it, if you take those articles that are behind paywalls on CNN and New York Times and wherever else, and then you plug them into archive.ph or archive.is, or there's probably any number of other extensions, you plug them in there, and then you just get them without the paywall. Look at that. Kind of makes you wonder why they have that. Maybe some people fall for it. You know what's funny is I bet all the people who read CNN in a serious way don't know things like this. And they're like, all right, CNN, take my money. Trump officials. Okay, here we go. I already read the headline. Whatever. The Trump administration fired more than 300 staffers Thursday night at the National Nuclear Security Administration, the agency tasked with managing the nation's nuclear stockpile, as part of broader Energy Department layoffs, according to 4 people with knowledge of the matter. 4 people. None of them named. And by the way, after reading this article, then you have knowledge of the matter. So CNN could just as easily quote you. Sources told CNN the officials did not seem to know this agency oversees America's nuclear weapons. So that's Donald Trump for you, just haphazardly going around firing officials. He wants to fire the government so badly that neither he nor anyone in his administration even knows what these agencies do. How strange is that? And gosh, I mean, what a dangerous situation we've put ourselves in, having a president who doesn't know what these totally illegitimate and unconstitutional agencies actually do. Not like Joe Biden, who knew everything that was going on in his administration, or Kamala, who explained Putin's very brutal invasion as a big country invading a little country. Now we have Donald Trump, who just doesn't know anything. I mean, sure, he was a real estate magnate and a developer. He was a television star and has been one of the most famous men on the planet for like 40 years and always seems to have everything go right for him somehow. And then after all of that, he figured out how to take down the country's most powerful political dynasties and become president not once, but thrice. But he has no idea what's happening in his own administration. Consider the danger we are under. Consider the danger we are under with a president who doesn't know what his administration or his agencies even do. It really is incredible. And my pal Jay is in the chat, just making it rain subscriptions as well. He just offered 10. So if you're in the Rumble chat, I think you just click on that. Or maybe you just engage in the chat, but I think you just click on that. I could be wrong. I don't know how these things work. I've never made it rain subscriptions before. Let's continue with this article. An Energy Department spokesperson disputed the number of personnel affected, telling CNN that less than 50 people were dismissed and that the dismissed staffers held primarily administrative and clerical roles. Oh, no. Sounds horrifying, really, doesn't it? It also included employees at NNSA headquarters. The NNSA has a headquarters. The National Nuclear Security Administration. Has anyone ever heard of that before right now? Probably not. It also included employees who write requirements and guidelines for contractors who build nuclear weapons. A source told CNN they believe these individuals were fired because no one has taken any time to understand what they do and the importance of their work to the nation's national security. That's redundant. You could have just said nation's security. The nation's national security. Members of Congress made their concerns about the NNSA firings known to the Energy Department, a Hill staffer told CNN. A person with knowledge of the matter told CNN that senators visited Energy Secretary Chris Wright to express concern about the NNSA cuts. Congress is freaking out because it appears DOE didn't really realize NNSA oversees the nuclear stockpile, one source said. The nuclear deterrent is the backbone of American security and stability, period. For there to be any, even very small holes poked, even in the maintenance of that deterrent, should be extremely frightening to people. So there have been small holes poked in our nuclear deterrent, which means, I guess, that the nuclear deterrent is not going to be what it once was. Well, that's terrible. Just to skip down toward the end here. An NNSA spokesperson referred CNN's questions to the DOE. The Energy Department will continue its critical mission of protecting our national security and nuclear deterrence in the development, modernization, and stewardship of America's atomic weapons enterprise, including the peaceful use of nuclear technology and non-proliferation, the DOE spokesperson told CNN. Okay. So I guess they're going to be just fine. And it's interesting as well. The agency is not speaking for itself. It is referring the questions up to the department. And that is probably an order that's gone down from the top. The heads of the department who have been placed in there by Donald Trump will do all the speaking for all of the agencies under that particular branch of the federal government. And then people at these agencies would not be authorized to speak, of course, which is why they're leaking. Political officials at the Energy Department told its non-political HR administrators to cite poor performance personnel files as a justification for firing the employees, the source said. Now I'm frustrated by the pressure some days, this is what happens when I start like a minute or two late. I'm like, oh man, things are off. Things are just like a little bit off. They don't match up just right. And then I can't read anymore. 2 of those HR employees submitted their resignations on Friday. In addition to overseeing America's nuclear weapons, the NNSA also helped secure nuclear material nationwide. Sources told CNN it's a critical mission, pointing to the Russian drone attack on a Chernobyl power plant reactor in Ukraine on Thursday. Did an attack on the reactor happen? And is Chernobyl a nuclear power plant? How can you even say these things? It's absurd. It's as though they want people to believe in an alternate reality or something. NNSA maintains sensors in Ukraine to help track nuclear risks, whether intentional or unintentional, a source said, adding the layoffs are frightening. Okay. So the nuclear agency under the Department of Energy tracks nuclear emissions in Ukraine? What? Why? Is Ukraine like our proxy state or something? Isn't that strange? And so we're going to talk more about Ukraine. We'll just see how it looks maybe after. Donald Trump last week obviously talked to Vladimir Putin. We covered that on the show. He also talked to the comedic actor in Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. And, of course, Donald Trump is the plenary authority of the executive branch. He is also the plenary authority of America's foreign policy. And that issue was at the heart of the Ukraine impeachment hoax back in late 2019. That impeachment, of course, ended. And then we got the very deadly pandemic right after it. So prior to Donald Trump, it was not okay that a president would be setting his own foreign policy. It was expected that the president would simply go along with the foreign policy establishment. This is CNN this morning. Stephen Collinson, who basically publishes a CNN column every day that at some point is the number one story on CNN. And it is always whatever the latest freak out about Donald Trump is. That's one of the things that makes me love looking at CNN so much. Because if you want to know what the normie layer is ingesting information-wise on a daily basis, just check out CNN's front page. Because the job of CNN's front page is to kind of lay it down for the normies. Trump offers key concessions to Putin ahead of Ukraine peace deal or peace talks in Saudi Arabia. And so they're all heading down to Saudi. The delegation that was sent to Europe is heading down there, I think minus J.D. Vance. I think it's just Rubio and Kellogg and Witkoff. We're going to come back to that in a second. And, oh, good. Oh, no. Thought it was going to be one of those times where I lost my highlights, but it seems not to be. Trump's administration has ended the Russian president's international isolation, shattered Western unity on the conflict, and cast doubt on how far the U.S. would go to defend Europe, signaling a stunning shift toward Putin and away from America's traditional allies. With a flurry of conflicting statements in their first forays into Europe, Trump aides also fueled concerns that the U.S. president will embrace just about any deal with Putin, even if it's a bad one for Ukraine and a continent whose borders are again threatened by Russian expansionism. And so this deals kind of with the same issues that we talked about at the beginning of the show: abstract power projection versus actual power. Now, borders of nations, as far as we've been told, have all been agreed to. And then they're enforced by, quote unquote, international law, the understanding by the UN, that kind of the UN and these global governing bodies, they're just the overseers. They set the rules and they say, well, this is how it's going to be. But they need an enforcement mechanism for that. And the enforcement mechanism, we've talked about this on half of the episodes that I've done for the last, year or so. First, you have the reputation that you can attack if you control all the media. Then you have the economic lever to pull, economic sanctions. You control the currency, you control markets. Then you have the resources and the trade routes. So you can basically cut countries off from the global economy, and depending on how self-sufficient they are, that can destroy their economy. And these are all the mechanisms that were used since World War II, but have probably been used for centuries, if not millennia, by the global regime to overthrow countries, bring them under control, or if they ever start getting out of line, this is a punishment mechanism as well. And then ultimately you use the military, represented as always by Team America World Police. We talked about this on Friday. And so when I saw this headline, I wanted to know what these concessions were. And the other element of this, of course, is these conflicting messages, as Collinson just mentioned. And we saw some of that last week. J.D. Vance, Pete Hegseth, and now General Kellogg, and we're going to go through a bit more of that. So what is that in reality? Are representatives of Trump's administration in an actual conflict with President Trump? Are they misrepresenting the administration's positions on a variety of important geopolitical issues, or are they just executing President Trump's strategy? It's questionable. You got to look at these things from both sides. Maybe these people are doing the best job ever on behalf of Donald Trump, or maybe they are expressing incorrectly the administration's positions, potentially because they are serving other masters or to cause chaos or whatever. And we've seen both over these last 2 years, I would argue, from people who are close to Donald Trump, who Donald Trump has chosen to be close to him. Okay? The point is that we don't have direct insight into those things, so we have to track it on a number of levels to try to understand the thing holistically, rather than just going by whatever kind of crumbs we're getting in our brief exposure to the thinking of these members of the administration, or whatever stuff we're being told by the media, which we know is going to be not only incomplete, but misleading. So which one is it? And it's important to do what we can to find out if we want to understand the issues. But let's skip down in the article. Concerns were exacerbated by Trump's warp speed attempts last week to fully rehabilitate Putin. Is that what he was doing? No, it wasn't. An accused war criminal. Come on. When he promoted Russia's foreign policy positions rather than the West's. What are the West's foreign policy positions in a multipolar world order? What are the West's foreign policy positions with a sovereign United States of America? And why would any elected administration, proper American administration, supported by the people, with the people's mandate, as it's on display all the time, why would we care about the West's foreign policy positions? For all intents and purposes, the West, as it's commonly been understood, is no more when it comes to geopolitics. In terms of culture and our kind of intellectual and philosophical foundations, we're always told that that's the West. We need to preserve Western culture. And then occasionally that is used as a stand-in by people who focus on race as the white culture. Understanding the global regime and how that has dominated Europe and then the United States for centuries upon centuries. Is the West just the global regime and the culture that the global regime has propagated? We have to really try to understand these terms now, or do away with using them. Why would we ever preference, quote unquote, Western culture over American culture? Isn't American culture the point? That's what we control. I don't consider myself to be the descendant of European culture in a way that would matter now. I can understand the philosophical and intellectual and artistic and cultural foundations of America as being largely influenced by Europe, of course. And so it's not a disavowal of any of that. It's just that where we're going from here forward is not dependent on what Europeans believe our foreign policy should be. The president, for instance, seemed to sympathize with Putin's rationales for the invasion and called for his return to the G8 grouping of industrialized nations after Russia was kicked out over the annexation of Crimea in 2014. Trump's rejection of the previous administration's lockstep coordination with Europe over Ukraine and the absence of Kyiv's negotiations from the Saudi talks also appeared to seriously weaken the Western negotiating position. So they're upset that Donald Trump is harming their negotiating position. European officials are likely to be far more sympathetic to Ukraine's views than Trump. And so if they are absent from any full-scale negotiations, Zelensky's position could be severely diminished. Well, here's the thing. There is no leverage that Zelensky can operate on. There is no leverage for European countries. The only leverage exists with Team America World Police and whether or not America is going to go along with those various levels of control that we've talked about. And Friday's episode was all about how these levels have been totally broken down and are breaking down. And the vision that Trump proposes, which is in line with the emergence of the multipolar world order, which cannot be stopped. That's happening regardless of whether or not we choose to like it or not like it. Our opinion about that thing happening is irrelevant because it's happening. We can attempt to project power in an abstract way, convince the world that really the power source is the United States along with our European allies and Israel and Australia and New Zealand, of course, and whatever nations are still proxy states, like South Korea. I guess Japan's our ally too, right? But that's not how it is anymore. All of this is music to Putin's ears, since it suggests that his status as an international pariah is over and that he has a deal within reach over Ukraine that would cement his territorial gains. The divisions Trump has opened inside NATO is delivering on one of Russia's most important foreign policy goals. That sentence doesn't seem to be written correctly. And of course, all the rest of the highlights did disappear. All good. We don't need to linger too long on that. So these are the concessions Donald Trump is making supposedly to Vladimir Putin. What concessions were there? He's taking the situation seriously and treating Russia as the superpower that Russia happens to be, with far more powerful allies than what the United States and the European countries, certainly what the United States has, and the European countries on their own have nowhere near the power of Russia or China or their allies. So taking them seriously is what would have to be done, unless we're just going to do the thing with nuclear saber rattling and then putting American troops on the ground to seize territory in Europe on Europe's behalf. They are upset that Europe is going to have to pay for its own defense and direct its own defense. It's very, very strange. It would be like if you get bullied and your big brother always takes care of it, and then your big brother leaves for college and is like, yeah, sorry, no, I can't come back. You're going to have to handle these bullies on your own. The idea that that was not the state of being prior is the anomaly. This here is not the anomaly. Very strange. Let us continue. Let's continue. I was going to comment on something in the chat, but I think maybe that'll take us too far afield. Volodymyr, the comedic actor in Ukraine, is talking tough. NBC News, Zelensky tells aides to reject U.S. pitch for 50% of Ukraine's rare earth minerals. Now, does Volodymyr Zelensky have the capability of negotiating in this way? No, he doesn't. And again, think of this situation minus the United States of America. Could Ukraine fight a war? No. Now, I don't think a war is actually happening. So I'm crazy, I know. Ukraine would have no ability to defend itself without the United States. That's been made clear throughout the entirety of Putin's very brutal invasion. And the 3-year anniversary of the very brutal invasion will be next Monday. So for the entire time, Ukraine has been totally at the mercy of Russia, minus the United States' influence, even within the central narrative. That is true. And now we are being told by the key players in Europe that it is also true for all of the countries in Europe, because they are worried that Vladimir Putin is going to expand throughout Europe. He's going to go even beyond what he has already taken from Ukraine. They pretend all of that is still Ukraine, rightfully, somehow. That Crimea is part of Ukraine, that the Donbass is part of Ukraine. It's not. It's all part of Russia. Russia's going to keep expanding. And Russia has friends, Belarus, Poland. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has told his aides to reject Trump administration officials' proposal that would grant the United States significant access to Ukraine's rare earth minerals. A Ukrainian official close to Zelensky confirmed to NBC News. U.S. officials said the proposal would be a form of repayment for the support Washington has provided Kyiv since its war with Russia began. But according to the aide close to him, Zelensky did not feel the agreement included adequate security guarantees for Ukraine. That's very sad. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent first proposed the draft agreement, which would have granted the United States 50% ownership of Ukraine's rare earth minerals, to Zelensky last week. I didn't let the ministers sign a relevant agreement because, in my view, it is not ready to protect us and our interests, Zelensky said at the Munich Security Conference. A U.S. official called Zelensky's response to the offer short-sighted, adding that it would secure an enduring partnership between the two countries. Binding economic ties with the United States will be the best guarantee against future aggression and an integral part of lasting peace. The U.S. recognizes this, the Russians recognize this, and the Ukrainians must recognize this. That's right. They must recognize it. There's no other choice because, 1, not a real country. 2, not a real president. 3, no leverage. What could their leverage possibly be? Abstract power projection of their very sovereign borders? Meaningless. And we've seen for 3 years that it's meaningless. Without the protection of the United States, they cannot defend themselves. With the help of the European nations, they cannot defend themselves. Europe, as far as NATO is concerned, has had the United States as Team America World Police. Team America World Police is going bye-bye as far as Europe is concerned. So Europe doesn't have any enforcement mechanism either. And they haven't been paying for any of their defense with NATO. They haven't been spending the country's GDP on their own defense. And instead, they have the United States subsidizing their siestas and their socialism. You know what I was thinking on Friday? I was actually thinking Siestas and Socialism might be a good title for today's episode. I think that I am going to, sometimes I have thoughts and I don't end up liking them, but I'm willing to try this one. If you guys hear me say something that sounds like a good episode title in any of these and you post it in the chat and I see it, I am totally open to taking suggestions for episode titles in the future. And I would, I think, find that very hilarious because I love crowdsourcing ideas. So for now, the title of this episode is going to be Siestas and Socialism, but I'm open to changing that. So we subsidize their siestas and socialism, and they are upset that we are not going to immediately come home from college and beat up their enemies for them. Russia is bullying them by not wanting to get nuked or attacked with bioweapons. And so now we need to make our way home from college. We're going to have to spend our whole spring break hunting down bullies? No, we're going to Myrtle Beach. That's what we're doing for spring break. We're not going to beat up Russia. So there's no leverage. And of course, by the way, the lead writer of this article, Kristen Welker, the terrible interviewer, terrible debate moderator, and apparently terrible reporter. Now, news from the false reality is incredibly interesting, and it can give us some insight into what's happening in reality prime, but it doesn't need to, okay? All we are trying to do is make sure not to get hoodwinked. We do not want to form the beliefs the regime wants us to form, and then on the basis of those beliefs, carry out the acts that the regime wants us to carry out. Because that helps them, we end up helping them form a reality that works to their benefit and not our benefit. So all we have to do is not get hoodwinked. And that's the focus, okay? It's not getting Republicans elected in 2026 or 2028. It's not making sure that everybody likes the members of the fantasy team or the members of the administration. Donald Trump is a vehicle to our understanding how much we've been lied about. Okay, he's a catalyst to our truth-seeking and to the awakening. That is our job. And when we're awakened, it means we don't get hoodwinked by what's on TV. And by TV, of course, I mean not only the television channels, but also what comes to us through all these various screens, all right? Movies are TV, TV is TV, the internet is TV, social media is TV. If they can communicate this stuff to us through screens, meaning an indirect form of communication, this is not us seeing that there is war in Ukraine and that Putin launched a very brutal invasion. And if we see war footage on one of these various Telegram video channels, you know, Intel Slava Z or DD Geopolitics or whatever, and those channels are fine, right? But it's just information under it. Oh, can't even say my own phrases now. Information among other information. That's all it is. It doesn't mean that that's the truth and that what we see on NBC is the false reality. They're both the false reality as far as we're concerned. We can't verify any of it. Now, if they're showing us videos from 7, 8, 9 years ago that happened after the 2014 overthrow of Ukraine, and we're seeing old video presented as new video of the very brutal invasion, then fine. It might be real. It's still projected to us out of time and out of context. So all that information is information among other information. It's not to figure out which is true and which is false, because that's impossible. We just have to apply what we take in to objective standards, which means that they have to conform to a coherent logic about how the world works. And we then check that all against the ultimate objective standards, which are God. Let's continue. The Telegraph out of the UK today. Very triggered, of course, as always, as all of these media organizations always are. Revealed Trump's confidential plan to put Ukraine in a stranglehold. How about that? You call your brother up at college and you say, please come home. Russia is giving me swirlies again. And your brother comes home, walks into school one day, sees Russia giving you a swirly, and says, hey, Russia, step aside, or you know what's coming. And your little brother says, oh, thank goodness. Thank goodness you have finally made it home from college. And then you grab your little brother and also give your little brother a swirly. Donald Trump has put Ukraine in a stranglehold. It's a headlock, given a little noogie. Donald Trump's demand for a $500 billion payback from Ukraine goes far beyond U.S. control over the country's critical minerals. It covers everything from ports and infrastructure to oil and gas and the larger resource base of the country. Wait a second. Sounds like Donald Trump is trying to own Ukraine or something. But wait, that is what the global regime has done. We went through that in the Mint Press news piece on Friday. We actually talked about that on Devolution on Saturday night. George Soros went in there, set up all the transnational companies, tried to take over Naftagaz, all these things. And now Donald Trump is doing it. Why aren't they happy about that? This is the sort of thing that they should be happy about that, or sort of thing they should be happy about. And I look at these things as proofs that Donald Trump is actually not beholden to Zionism. He's just tricking us and helping usher us into the Great Reset, as he is often accused of by people on the internet who are the most black-pilled black pillars I've ever seen. That stuff seems like an op to me. And listen, is there some remote chance that Donald Trump is a bad guy and he is just dog walking us all into our doom? Yeah. I mean, you can never totally disregard anything that is possible. Like, could something terrible like that happen? He's just been under control the whole time, and he's actually been the hoodwinker in chief. Could be, but come on. And if somehow these governments that seem to be run by totally incompetent people who can't even competently communicate their own agendas, and if the media organizations that promote those agendas, all be on behalf of the global regime and on behalf of the uniparty regime here in America. You know, as USAID floods this money for propaganda all around the world, taking over all these other countries, there seem to be two factions. If there's only one faction and all of that is meant to exterminate the whites and enslave the world's people, well, I mean, at that point, we're probably all screwed, to be honest. But otherwise, if there are actually two factions and there is the kind of unipolar faction versus the multipolar faction, if we do have the centralizers versus the decentralizers, then these are the sorts of issues where you can clearly see which side Donald Trump is on. If it was only one thing, it would be very, very odd that all of the allies of the uniparty in America are freaking out about Donald Trump, helping to disseminate that belief widely so that other people freak out about Donald Trump and then oppose everything Donald Trump is doing if he's actually walking us into our doom on their behalf. He seems to be using their agenda against them. Their playbook against them. And maybe we'll get into a little bit of the playbook later. Man, I thought I had no things to talk about, and it turns out that I can. I have like 50 links today, and we're through like 6 of them. It's amazing. The terms of the contract that landed at Volodymyr Zelensky's office a week ago amount to the U.S. economic colonization of Ukraine in legal perpetuity. That was the situation there already. It just wasn't under a sovereign United States of America. It was under the UN, global governance, the West, the geopolitical West. You know, that's maybe that's the way we should talk about it. Separating the geopolitical West from the cultural West, because we don't want to throw away the cultural West, but the geopolitical West, as we've been told it exists for our entire lives, but we've been told it exists that way for well over a century, that thing's gone. The Telegraph has obtained a draft of the pre-decisional contract marked privileged and confidential and dated February 7th. It states that the U.S. and Ukraine should form a joint investment fund to ensure that hostile partners to the conflict do not benefit from the reconstruction of Ukraine. Well, who are the hostile partners? That's the real question. Is it Russia? The agreement, and by the way, that whole part of Ukraine that's been warred over is already Russia. So are we going to take a 50-50 split with Russia on Ukraine? Okay. The agreement covers the economic value associated with the resources of Ukraine, including mineral resources, oil and gas resources, ports, and other infrastructure as agreed, leaving it unclear what else might be encompassed. This agreement shall be governed by New York law without regard to conflicts of laws and principles. The U.S. will take 50% of recurring revenues received by Ukraine from extraction of resources and 50% of the financial value of all new licenses issued to third parties for the future monetization of resources. There will be a lien on such revenues in favor of the U.S. That clause means pay us first, then feed your children, said one source close to the negotiations. Is Donald Trump, this is just worth asking, as he's kind of portraying himself as the reincarnation of Napoleon, apparently. Is Donald Trump just taking ownership of the American empire? Is he trying to show the world what the American empire actually looks like and how it's always approached things? Are these just the initial terms that are going to be scaled back in the future? Donald Trump, master negotiator, always mid-negotiation, okay? Could be any of those. I don't know what the right answer is. But we will see over time as these situations progress. Where are we? It states that for all future licenses, the United States will have a right of first refusal for the purchase of exportable minerals. Washington will have sovereign immunity and acquire near total control over most of Ukraine's commodity and resource economy. The fund, quote, shall have the exclusive right to establish the method, selection criteria, terms, and conditions, end quote, of all future licenses and projects, and so forth in this vein. It seems to have been written by private lawyers, not the U.S. Departments of State or Commerce. Now, that is very interesting. Here's another interesting point. President Zelensky himself proposed the idea of giving the U.S. a direct stake in Ukraine's rare earth elements and critical minerals on a visit to Trump Tower in September. So there is the comedic actor meeting with Donald Trump. Trump Tower. Now, where's Trump Tower? It's in New York. And look what this says. As agreed. So, is this already in place? You got to think something like that is going on and that we are in the public disclosure story phase when it comes to Ukraine's minerals and the ultimate deal here. And when you hear stories about how we've allotted $179 billion to Ukraine and only 77 has made it over there, and we're going to give them all this military equipment, all the military equipment every time it was promised to Ukraine, it was always, oh, it's going to be there in 6 months. Oh, it turns out they don't know how to use these weapon systems. Blah, blah, blah. On and on and on. There has been no point at which Ukraine has ever even dented Russia's plan throughout this entire time, which indicates to me that it was already a fait accompli. That's for Napoleon. 3 years ago, and probably much longer ago than that. I know, Ukraine, oh, they attacked Kursk. They're holding that position in the Kursk region, and they're going to agree to give Russia back Kursk if Russia agrees to give back the entire eastern third of Ukraine as well as Crimea. Oh, what a deal that'll be. Russia will probably take that deal. Imagine trying to make deals with no leverage whatsoever. It would be like walking into a convenience store where the clerk doesn't even speak English, realizing you have no money, and then being like, you're going to have to give me a Red Bull and this pack of Tic Tacs and 2 packs of cigarettes. Oh, yeah, and the whole that whole roll of scratch-off tickets, because, man, those are fun when I'm all hopped up on Red Bull and can't stop smoking cigarettes. Oh, man. No leverage whatsoever. The clerk would immediately call the police. And if it was anything like the rooftop Koreans in Los Angeles guarding their stores during the LA riots in the Rodney King days, man, they're going to have a bat back there or maybe a shotgun, and your ass is not leaving with a roll of scratch-offs. So you're going to have to make other plans for how to spend your evening. Let's keep going. So, as a result of all of Donald Trump's dangerous machinations of last week, the Europeans have called an emergency meeting. Emergency meeting would be an okay title if I couldn't think of any other titles, but we're not calling this episode emergency meeting. This is Reuters. Reuters, one of the parts of the global regime propaganda media, and I believe one of the parts that received USAID money. Europe talks up more defense spending as Ukraine peacekeeper plan divides. Yeah, more defense spending. Why didn't you think of that way earlier? now that you clearly have no leverage and are begging. The Europe thing is even funnier because it's not even like you're begging your older brother. It's like you and all your nerdy friends are begging one person's older brother to come home from college. European leaders meeting in Paris on Monday for emergency talks called for higher spending to ramp up the continent's defense capabilities, but remained split on the idea of deploying peacekeepers to Ukraine to back up any peace deal. And so we always had the UN peacekeeping missions, and those would always be backed by the United States. Eventually, you would have Team America World Police. Now, the global governing bodies are just trying to pay off small African nations to provide the UN peacekeeping troops. It doesn't talk about that in this article. That's from, I don't know, a year or two ago. They basically go around to the colonies they still have, and they're like, hey, can we pay you to wage civil war in your own country? Can we pay you to help us make other countries submit to our agenda? It's not working out so well anymore. Total breakdown of the global regime's system. And again, unless we're all getting like double hoodwinked, the way out of our, it's like a fun house, and the way out of our own hoodwinking is just another hoodwinking. Like, okay, if that's what happens, man, we're all screwed. And we should at least consider that that might be what's happening. And when you get to that point, the only thing left to do is pray absolutely as hard as you can, because no one's coming to save you, anybody, if we are at that point. The Paris meeting was called by French President Emmanuel Macron. And Manny Mac, again, is the guy who showed Donald Trump off as the king of the world. You remember him and his male wife getting absolutely manhandled by Donald Trump's handshakes just a couple months ago. So Trump arranged bilateral talks with Russia, excluding European allies and Ukraine from negotiations to end the war, scheduled to begin in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday. We'll get to that in just a second. So they all need to have a meeting now. What are we going to do? They're going to have these negotiations displayed to the entire world that we are not going to be a part of. Now, are those negotiations already done? For sure. Is there any conceivable way that Donald Trump is sending his negotiating team? This is no offense to General Kellogg, no offense to Steve Witkoff, and, whatever about little Marco. But it's not about that. This stuff has been set in place for a long time. You, first of all, definitely don't need negotiations to end conflicts that are not happening. And the only parties with any power in this situation meeting, what is the role for Ukraine and the European allies? They don't have any leverage. Ukraine's not a real country. European officials have been left stunned and flat-footed by the Trump administration's moves on Ukraine, Russia, and European defense in recent days, and now must confront the reality of a future with less U.S. protection. They are finally realizing that their brother is away at college. The U.S. decision to go it alone with Russia has sparked a realization among European nations that they will have to do more to ensure Ukraine's security. No, there is no ensuring Ukraine's security. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who ahead of the meeting said he was willing to send peacekeeping troops to Ukraine, on Monday evening said that there must be a U.S. security commitment for European countries to put boots on the ground. Okay, so he's saying he's going to send peacekeeping troops, but the only way he's going to do that is if the U.S. is going to do it, right? Oh, man. It's like taunting the bully while the bully is in detention. You go up to the window at the door. They have the little glass in the middle of the door. at the high school, and you look through and you say, ha, 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 Russia, I see you're in detention. There's no help coming. You can't say that you are going to take on the bully and confront the bully yourself if you're still dependent on your brother getting home from college. He said it was too early to say how many British troops he would be willing to deploy. A peacekeeping force would not only raise the risk of a direct confrontation with Russia, which launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, but also stretch European armies whose arsenals have been depleted by supplying Ukraine and decades of relative peace. So Europe's having a meeting on how they're going to respond now that the U.S. is not including them in the negotiations and is not including Ukraine in the negotiations, just on the fact that neither of them can actually defend themselves. And so they have no leverage. So they're actually non-parties to the negotiations. Without the United States, all of Ukraine would just be Russia. And in a real world where Russia actually wanted to take over all of Europe, it is quite clear that Europe would not be able to stop them from doing so. So how is it possible that Russia is the bad guy if they are not choosing to simply take over all of these countries? In the old days, they could do that, right? It's almost like Russia knows that it has consistently been invaded and infiltrated by this very same global regime, just like we have been, just like China has been, just like the Middle East has been, just like Africa has been. Isn't it crazy that the global regime that has persisted, and we can talk even just about Balfour Declaration till now, the kind of Rothschild banking regime and how that has affected geopolitics, the Bolsheviks. Has Russia been invaded by this very same global regime, and have they taken power over parts of Russia? Yes, that has happened historically. And to the extent that Russia has removed them and has not advanced on them to seize their territory, then who's the aggressor? Is Russia invading anyone? Only according to global governance, which again is an abstract projection of power that has only been able to wield real power based on infiltrations into governments, media control. You know, the infiltrations are a product of all these other things. Media control, financial control, control over resources, control over trade routes. And then at the end, they have Team America World Police. That's it. There's no leverage there. If Putin wanted to go seize all those countries, he could just do it, unless the U.S. was going to stop him. But he doesn't do it, which should tell you he's not actually trying to govern all those peoples, and he's not actually trying to send the entire world into chaos. It is the global regime system of government and their attempt to take over the entire world under the belief that Team America World Police would always be there, or that some other world police would always be within their grasp, that has caused this situation. They've skipped leg day, let's say, right? They didn't bother strengthening the central part of their regime. Instead, outsourcing that level of control to the United States of America on the understanding that the United States of America would always be there. And why would the United States of America always be there? Because they controlled our finances. It's the US dollar, and that's what makes us rich and viable. Do we need that anymore? It doesn't seem like it. Do these other nations need that? No. Now, Trump last week said that BRICS was dead. We're going to see how that goes. And we're going to discuss, maybe if we get there, some gold BRICS at some point. Maztec in the chat asked if I could blow up these articles more. They're as blown up as they're going to be. If you're not able to see it, if you're looking on a phone or something, there's not a whole lot I can do about that besides totally taking myself off screen. And I don't think that's the best move, although whatever. If that is the best move, if that's what people want, all good. I don't really care. Let's continue. So we now have the Saudi meetings about to happen or already happening. Rubio's over there. He's been meeting with MBS. There was some video released of Rubio in the room with Mohammed bin Salman. And I believe that, Michael Waltz over there as well. This is the Associated Press today, another one of those global regime propaganda outlets funded in part by USAID. Rubio leading U.S. delegation to Saudi Arabia for talks with Russia on Ukraine, according to AP source. Oh, thank goodness we had a source to show us what was happening in videos, and obviously happening because we're being told directly about it. You don't need a source. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is leading a delegation to Saudi Arabia for direct talks with Russian officials in the coming days to seek an end to Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, a U.S. official said Sunday. Also expected to take part in the talks in Riyadh about Russia's February 2022 invasion is National Security Advisor Michael Waltz and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. Let's skip down. It wasn't immediately clear if any Ukrainians would take part in the talks. Ukrainian delegation is in Saudi Arabia to pave the way for a possible visit by Zelensky, a Ukrainian official said. And Zelensky reiterated over the weekend the common phrase that we have heard again and again and again, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. Catchphrases. They need to make a department of catchphrases. You have to wonder if that's what the State Department has actually been doing all these many years, not actually making peace anywhere, just coming up with phrases that they can say that will like seep into our brains and they'll just stay in there. You can't have negotiations about Ukraine without Volodymyr Zelensky. Oh, why, Kami? Why can't they have that? He's the president. Is he? Did he win an election? No, he canceled their elections. Are these parts of Ukraine that we are told have been invaded, are they actually parts of Ukraine? No, they're parts of Russia. According to international law, they are parts of Russia. The people inhabiting those lands are part of Russia. They have voted to be part of Russia. They've had referenda to be part of Russia. They are part of Russia. Andrei Yermak, a top Zelensky advisor, said Sunday there was no possibility of Ukrainian and Russian representatives meeting directly in the immediate future. In a Telegram post, Yermak said the Ukrainians weren't planning to do so, quote, until we develop a plan to end the war and bring about a, quote unquote, just peace. So they're going to create a plan to bring about the peace, and then they will meet to negotiate. Mikhailo Podolyak, another Zelensky advisor, on Saturday denied that Ukraine will participate in any planned U.S.-Russia meetings in Saudi Arabia. There's nothing on the negotiating table that would be worth discussing, he told Ukrainian television. So that's a nice cover story for not having any leverage. There's nothing here that we could actually agree to. There's nothing they're presenting that we want. Therefore, we're not going to participate in the negotiations. Okay, well, you have no leverage. So even if you expressed things that you did want, there's no reason to believe that anyone would give you those things because you have no leverage. Sviridenko's, wait, who the heck is Sviridenko? Were we told about Sviridenko? I didn't see a Sviridenko in here anywhere. And of course, there wasn't one. This is quality journalism from the Associated Press. Came within hours, those comments from Sviri, I don't know how to say that. Sviridenko. There we go. Sviridenko. Who knows? Remarks came within hours of Witkoff's statement that high-level meetings were imminent in Saudi Arabia. Witkoff didn't specify with whom they would be meeting and what they would discuss, but he said that he was leaving for Saudi Arabia on Sunday evening. And as I said, they have been meeting with Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince. One thing to note in that article, and in many of these articles, is that we will see Ukrainian officials. Ukraine has an illegitimate government, an unelected comedic actor for its president, and is not a real country. So there can be officials that are on different levels. There can also be, just like there can be officials in our government who are not actually expressing any sort of official view of the administration. And we saw that throughout Trump's first term. A U.S. official from Department XYZ who asked not to be named for fear of retaliation from the administration told us blah, blah, blah. So it doesn't actually matter what the officials say. That's not necessarily an official viewpoint in the first place. And we know that they set up shadow governments whenever they don't have their government in place. The strange thing now in the United States of America is that they don't seem to have any sort of shadow government. They can still have the resistance within the departments and the agencies, although that seems like it's on the path to being eliminated. But there's no official shadow government. There's not anybody that the regime can really do business with. So they have to rely on the other aspects like bankers, state governors that can resist, state attorneys general, and maybe we'll get into that if we have time. Their system is breaking down. And again, this is another one of those times where if it's possible that Trump was just dog walking us to our own doom, he's doing a damn good job of hiding it. Okay, continuation. Now, Donald Trump had prepared or suggested, I should say, a plan for Gaza that he told us about a couple weeks ago. He was going to make it the Riviera of the Middle East. This is Reuters from Friday. Saudi Arabia spearheads Arab scramble for alternative to Trump's Gaza plan. Sounds like they're in a diner. I'll have the Arab scramble. It's just eggs and falafel. Hummus on top. I'll have the Arab scramble. The latest Egyptian proposal involves forming a national Palestinian committee to govern Gaza without Hamas involvement, international participation in reconstruction without displacing Palestinians abroad, and movements toward a two-state solution, 3 Egyptian security sources said. And so they're finding out about these alternative plans. There was dismay in Saudi Arabia. They were aggravated. These other countries, Egypt, Jordan, and elsewhere, they were upset that Donald Trump was talking about what to do with Gaza. It's not his business. The Middle Eastern leaders, the Arab leaders, need to meet on this to decide what's actually going to happen over there. This I found very interesting. Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund is holding a conference in Miami this month that Reuters revealed Trump is expected to attend. So we've got Trump talking about his own sovereign wealth fund. Saudi would be the key player in these bilateral negotiations between, I guess that makes it kind of trilateral, between United States and Russia. It's down in Miami, so it's very close to Mar-a-Lago. The talks have been about Russia meeting here, Putin potentially traveling here, Putin at Mar-a-Lago, Putin in Miami for these talks. This would be the sort of thing that would make the global regime lose its mind in utter embarrassment. Their irrelevance is being shown to the world. Talked about that on Friday. It is even more present here. And I guess we can leave it there as far as this article is concerned. Will we be seeing Vladimir Putin in the United States of America? We've seen Xi Jinping visit Mar-a-Lago, why wouldn't we see Putin? And it's because Russia is like our ultimate enemy or something. I cannot wait till Rocket Man comes to the United States of America, watching them lose their mind about Kim Jong-un having a total win. Beautiful. My good friend, Ghost of Based Patrick Henry, my Badlands colleague. I don't like to say colleague, actually. He's just my friend. He also is a contributor at Badlands. Colleague. Such a weird word when you work independently, and someone else does as well. He brought up this article, posted this on Telegram from 2018 in the Daily Mail. We talk about timelines. Saudi Arabia plans to build a Riviera of the Middle East in bid to become a global tourism destination with high-speed trains linking its holiest cities. And you can go through, check out these plans if you like. This is all about a Red Sea project. Now, would this Red Sea project, the map here, this is the Sinai Peninsula, that's Egypt. And so the idea about the Ben Gurion Canal is that it would go up and connect the Mediterranean and Red Seas. Pardon me for 1 second, hold for processing. So that would be one of the Riviera projects. Could there be another Riviera project? It's really going to be interesting to find these things out as the time goes on, because we can see that all of these things have been planned out well in advance and are not actually developing as we are being told about them by our media. And so if these plans are set out in advance and the plans are peaceful and the plans conflict with the global regime's agenda and their plan for top-down, one world, global government, the liberal international rules-based order, if these peaceful plans for economic development are threatening their plans for economic development that gives them total global control, is that the sort of thing they would want to go to war over? I'd say yes. Do they have the power to go to war over these things? I would suggest the answer is no. And they're telling us over and over and over and over and over again that the answer is no. That's why they need their big brother to come home from college. Really, what they're saying is, oh boy, you're going to be in big trouble when my brother gets home from college. And they just show videos of back when their brother used to protect them. It's not there anymore. It's not there anymore. What are they going to do? I don't know how we could imagine that these wars are actually happening and are being fought by countries that cannot defend themselves. Can Ukraine defend itself? No. Can Europe defend itself even collectively as Europe rather than the individual nations? Again, the answer is no. So how are they fighting wars that last for years and years and years? I don't know. Someone's going to have to tell me. Until then, I'm just going to be a crazy conspiracy theorist. Okay, well, I understand that some of these things might be fake, and I understand that the news is fake, but you can't just say that the whole thing's fake. Okay, you're right. I can't. Just making it up. That's what it is. It's what it must be. Let us continue. Let us shift our focus. We are going to come back. We're going to bring it all back to these here United States of America. There was a good thread yesterday that really captures a bunch of what we've been talking about when it comes to color revolutions and Norm Eisen. Norm Eisen This is Jacktron Prime. I don't know anything about this account. Elon Musk interacted with this. That's when it went large. I posted it in the info stream. Maybe I can do this every now and then when I remember. Here is the thread in the chat on Rumble. If you want to read along, you can do it there. Who is Norm Eisen, the hatchet man behind the anti-Trump color revolution? Norm Eisen isn't just some legal expert or ethics advocate. He's a political operative who spent his entire career using the legal system to target conservatives, especially Donald Trump. He's an expert on color revolutions. And of course, he has written the Democracy Playbook. He graduated Harvard Law School in 91, met his friend Barack Obama there. During his time there, he also served as the assistant director of the Anti-Defamation League and a research assistant to his teacher, Alan Dershowitz. Interestingly, Alan Dershowitz defended Donald Trump from impeachment. An impeachment whose architect was, among others, Norm Eisen. Norm Eisen co-founded Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, CREW, a so-called watchdog group that claims to fight corruption. Under Eisen's leadership, CREW overwhelmingly targeted Republican officials while ignoring Democrat corruption. And as always, it's important to state, we have a uniparty. The Republican label and the Democrat label are meaningless, okay? And when you understand they're meaningless, then you stop focusing on what's good for Republicans. We don't need to focus on what's good for Republicans. We can focus on what's good for Americans, American interest, sovereignty, the return to the original Constitution, and what the founding principles and the founding mythology were, because that is where we're headed, and that's where Donald Trump is trying to take us. Republicans winning, as we have seen throughout our entire lives, is not generally helpful to advance those causes. So for us to then prioritize them would be senseless. Let's continue. We'll skip some of this. I don't want to go through the entire thing. The entire thing's worth reading if you need a background on Norm Eisen, but we don't need to go through all of it. So Eisen was Obama's ethics czar. Obama brought Eisen into his administration as special counsel for ethics and government reform in 2009. Eisen helped craft one of the strictest lobbying bans in U.S. history, but did it really curb corruption? And again, he says most of that went after Republicans in favor of Democrats. He was then the ambassador to the Czech Republic, a training ground for legal coups. From 2011 to 2014, Eisen served as U.S. ambassador to the Czech Republic, a country battling political corruption, as many of these small European nations are. Good twin versus evil twin everywhere. The sovereign people, the sovereign leaders in sovereign nations battling against the global regime's infiltration throughout the world. Happens everywhere. They get in, they install a uniparty. His mission, promote anti-corruption. We just had they were actually celebrating, the mainstream media was celebrating the anniversary of the death of Alexei Navalny, who was said to be the opposition leader in Russia, Putin's main opposition. Dude had 2% support in Russia. No one cared about Alexei Navalny. He was the leader of an opposition movement. That means he's essentially a global regime intel construct that they use to infiltrate, present the idea of an opposition to the autocratic regime, and we'll get to that in just a second. But that's what Navalny was, the political opposition, and his cause was anti-corruption. Let me just ask the machine what his organization was. The name of it. Because they always have that name. It was the Anti-Corruption Foundation. Well, that was hard to remember. Anti-Corruption Foundation Incorporated. It has that cannot be the same thing. It has a New York address on Charity Navigator. And I can't, that would be, oh my gosh. It really is it's based in New York. Okay, so now I have to share this. This is incredible. I don't know how I didn't notice this. I think it was last year. A year ago this time, I did like a 3-episode series on the podcast about Alexei Navalny. So if you're not familiar with how these things work, go back and check that out. This is Alexei Navalny's wife, by the way. That is Yulia Navalny. That's Alexei right there. And these are 2 more of their stooges. And down here it says the Anti-Corruption Foundation. It's got a U.S. registered tax number, a U.S. registered 501c3. How about that? So Alexei Navalny has a 501c3 nonprofit tax-exempt foundation in the United States. I'm asking the machine one more question, because they had another one in Belarus where they tried to stand up a female Alexei Navalny. Anyhow, we don't need to spend more time on this, but there was another one of these in Belarus where they tried to stage a similar kind of color revolution with a very similar candidate. There they chose a more Kamala Harris rather than Barack Obama. So they got a woman. This is the leader of the opposition. And they always call it the opposition. A color revolution, back to the thread, is a playbook for regime change used to topple foreign governments. It relies on protests, legal challenges, media disinformation, and election disputes. It's been used to overthrow leaders in Ukraine, Georgia, and other countries. Eisen literally wrote the playbook on this. In 2019, he published The Democracy Playbook, a guide on how to remove authoritarian leaders, and they have the link to that on the Brookings Institution's website, the brooking.edu address. And Jacktron Prime highlights parts of that document, suggests replacing the word democracy with bureaucracy. I think that the concept is a little more expansive than that, but I totally get where he's going. And again, if you want to see that, you can click on the link in the Rumble chat. Compare this with a passage from a book by the former ambassador to Russia under Obama, Michael McFaul, who is currently a professor at Stanford and a board member of the National Democratic Institute, which receives millions of dollars in grants from places like USAID. So he goes through some of the elements of the democracy playbook. What they go after is a quote-unquote semi-autocratic regime rather than fully autocratic. And so that's like here in the United States, Trump was the perfect target, he says, because he was an outsider who challenged the deep state. He didn't have full control over the bureaucracy. He respected constitutional limits, unlike actual dictators, making him vulnerable to legal warfare. The establishment painted Trump as a dictator, but in reality, he was a democratically elected leader under attack. And so you have, again, the 2 layers of that government. Donald Trump has to play perfectly within the bounds of the lawfare and the rules as written by the enemy. He also has to play perfectly within the bounds of the U.S. Constitution so that when we get back to the place, when we get back to our destination, which I know sounds kind of weird, when we get back there, it's going to be legally and morally and by virtue of his mandate unassailable. So he's got to follow the original Constitution, can't do anything more immoral, and he has to have the public mandate on his side on every issue in order to advance. And as I and many of my friends have argued many times over the last many years, many of you, I'm sure, have argued this in your circles. That's why he didn't stay in power despite winning an election in 2020, because he was concerned about the level of the public mandate and whether or not the public would be behind him as he took the next steps based on media control and the complicity of the Republican establishment and the people who support the Republican establishment. Step 2, as he outlines it, an unpopular incumbent. And he notes that this is a manufactured narrative. That's the only way to manufacture something like that. Or the only way to get something like that is to manufacture, I should say. How did they make Trump look unpopular? 24/7 negative media coverage, fake polls, pushing the lie that Biden had a double-digit lead, smear campaigns, the Russia hoax, Ukraine's quid pro quo, and the Charlottesville hoax, big tech censorship. That was a huge one. The real numbers tell a different story. The rallies, the gain in votes from 2016 to 2020. A united and organized opposition. This is something that they actually did really well in the United States. And this was because they used social media and the censorship apparatus built into the social media platforms. You get everybody on social media. You get everybody virtue signaling in order to farm attention on social media. And then you censor all the opposing voices. And then it looks like everyone out in reality, when they do the big marches and protests for Black Lives Matter, for the Women's March, etc. And then online, in the projection of that false reality that exists everywhere, people just scroll all day long, particularly when there was no exposure to the in-person reality during the very deadly pandemic. The only time most of these people really went out and interacted was when they went out to participate in BLM protests. And they were like, and what did they experience then? Everybody here is on our side. Who was in on it? The media, the intelligence community, Hollywood celebrities, community groups, Silicon Valley, social media. Number 4, an ability to push the narrative that the election was fair. Transition Integrity Project, big tech censorship, preloaded media narratives, covering up evidence. The fix was in before Election Day, of course. And they told us forever that voter fraud didn't exist, even though it had existed for a really long time. And they told us after 2016 that it did exist and that it got Donald Trump elected, and it existed including in the machines. But it worked because many people didn't think an election could actually be stolen. Now we know that elections are simply fake. Enough independent media to push the fraud narrative. And they did have that. And they were helped by independent media on our side. Fox News betrayal, they say. Well, what about all the normie podcasters on the right who always talk about the left and the Democrats at the Blaze and the Daily Weimar and, of course, Fox News and the based and red-pilled influencers online, many of whom are part of the Turning Point Network? It really is amazing how everyone just went along with the stolen election, called Joe Biden president for 4 years. Number 6, a political opposition capable of mobilizing mass protests. We kind of just went to that. Maybe I skipped ahead there too far. And then he goes back into the USAID and all of that, goes back to Norm Eisen, and then he goes down to Gene Sharp. And so you might remember he references many times in here Darren Beatty's big article in the summer of 2020 about color revolutions. And that was kind of when the concept really began to capture the zeitgeist. Gene Sharp, the Machiavelli of nonviolence, has been fairly described as the most influential American political figure you've never heard of. Sharp, who passed away in January 2018, was a beloved yet mysterious intellectual giant of nonviolent protest movements, the father of the whole field of the study of strategic nonviolent action. Over his career, he wrote more than 20 books about nonviolent action and social movements. His how-to pamphlet on nonviolent revolution, from dictatorship to democracy, has been translated into over 30 languages and is cited by protest movements around the world. In the U.S., his ideas are widely promoted through activist training programs and by scholars of nonviolence, and have been used by nearly every major protest movement for the last 40 years. For these contributions, Sharp has been praised by progressive heavyweights like Howard Zinn and Noam Chomsky, nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize 4 times, compared to Gandhi, and cast as a lonely prophet of peace, champion of the downtrodden, and friend of the left. Sharp's influence on the U.S. activist left and social movements abroad has been significant, but he is better understood as one of the most important U.S. defense intellectuals of the Cold War, an early neoliberal theorist concerned with the supposed inherent violence of the centralized state, and a quiet but vital counselor to anti-communist forces in the socialist world from the 1980s onward. And let's continue. So they go down Norm Eisen, post-impeachment, who funds Norm Eisen, follow the money. And the upshot of all of that was, I guess, Norm Eisen blocking him. So kudos. Check that thread out if you like. Now, we are dealing with where did I want to go next? You know what? Let's just go here. And pause for a second. I want to just have a look at the chat and make sure I'm not missing anything here. And where are we at? Okay. Let's keep going. I will probably make it through half of what I lined up for today. Another day like that. This from CNN this morning, what to know about Trump's appeal to the Supreme Court. Donald Trump is headed to the Supreme Court for the first time in his second term, using an emergency appeal to call on the justices to let him fire the head of a government ethics watchdog agency. Oh, gosh, Donald Trump, dictator, appearing again. The case Besant versus Dellinger could eventually help clarify whether Congress may create independent agencies that are protected from the whims of the White House, or whether presidents can fire anyone seen as a potential critic. Is this about potential critics? No, it's not. Can there be independent agencies in the executive branch? No, there can't. The president is the plenary authority of the executive branch. Congress can set up these bodies, but if the president chooses not to run them, then it doesn't matter. It arrives at a moment when Trump is attempting to consolidate power within the federal government, summarily dismissing federal officials who might challenge him, and attempting to freeze federal funding that Congress has required to be spent. So the idea then is that Congress can force the president's hand and make him spend whatever money they appropriate. And because they call these agencies independent, the president then has to let them do whatever they want. Now, a few weeks ago, I put up a post on Telegram about a Supreme Court decision called Humphrey's Executor. And that is what we are ultimately going to get to. It was a case from 1935 that said Congress can create independent regulatory agencies that are not fully under presidential control. The president cannot remove officers of these agencies at will if Congress has specified a fixed term of office. The decision, according to Perplexity, carved out a category of agencies like the FTC, the SEC, and the Federal Reserve that are not fully controlled by the executive branch. It directly contradicts Article 2, which vests all executive power in the president. So this is one of those instances where we run into the problem of judicial supremacy. We're told that because the courts have made a decision, the plain language of the Constitution is overridden, and then we need another court decision. At some point, we need the Supreme Court to override its own precedent to take us back to the language of the original Constitution. which is why it's so important to get originalist justices on the Supreme Court to the extent the body is even valid in the first place. The way the founders would have seen this, there is no conflicting with the language of the Constitution. You can't override the Constitution. At the center of the dispute is Hampton Dellinger, who President Joe Biden, president, quote unquote, named in 2023 to lead the Office of Special Counsel for a 5-year term. He was confirmed by the Senate early last year. Why did it take so long to confirm him? The Office of the Special Counsel, which is unrelated to special counsels like Jack Smith or Robert Mueller, who are appointed to oversee politically sensitive Justice Department investigations, handles allegations of whistleblower retaliation and is an independent agency. Created under the Carter administration, Congress made clear the special counsel could be removed by the president only for inefficiency, neglect of duty, or malfeasance in office. And is it any surprise that we consistently talk about efficiency with the Department of Government Efficiency? Why is Trump picking this fight? Dellinger's case could have implications beyond just his office because Trump has fired other officials at independent agencies that have similar legal protections, including the former chair of the National Labor Relations Board and a member of the Merit Systems Protection Board. And many other independent agencies could be affected by the High Court's decisions, from the Federal Trade Commission to the Federal Reserve. Now, we've already seen the Supreme Court go after some of the powers of these supposedly independent agencies, removing, for instance, in Jarkissi v. SEC, the ability for these independent agencies to have their own administrative court system where they are prosecutor, judge, jury, and executioner. They bring the charges, they investigate the cases, they bring the charges, they go to court, they then decide guilty every time. Then they determine what the punishment's going to be and then mete out that punishment themselves. It is an absolutely insane system of government that the founders would have never created. It is an abomination to think that an independent, federal, unelected, bureaucratic organization could create its own laws that everybody has to follow and can then adjudicate and punish whoever it deems is violating those laws. And that's the situation as we had it. The Supreme Court has already been chipping away at the structure of that. Now, if the Congress sets up unelected agencies that can make laws on their own and are not accountable to anyone because they've already had their validity affirmed by the Supreme Court, what government are we really operating under? Because the Congress and the Senate essentially only pass legislation to take our rights away, and they put all that in spending bills, and that's about all they do. Then the agencies create all the laws that actually determine how Americans and their businesses must conduct themselves. And again, they're accountable to no one. So on whose behalf are they making all of these rules? And if it was left to the people to determine whether or not the leaders of these organizations, these agencies, could continue in office, the people would, of course, determine, no, they can't. And so they set up a situation that makes sure the people's opinion doesn't matter at all. Would the founders have ever set up that scenario? There is absolutely no reason to believe that would be possible. Polymath in the chat says, even Alexander Hamilton would say no to this nonsense. And yeah, that's the funny thing. Even the most global regime-oriented, central bank-oriented members of the founding generation would have never been okay with this. Let us continue Congress granted those boards independence so they could make decisions one step removed from the politics of the moment. What? The politics of the moment are how the people decide who they're going to elect in a legitimate system. Of course, we don't have one of those. And by the way, this is how they determine how our elections are run, too. During his first term, for instance, Trump repeatedly leaned on the Federal Reserve to set lower rates. The board largely ignored him. What does that mean? What does that mean? That means they're operating on behalf of interests that exist outside of the federal government and thus outside of the purview of the American people. They have set up a shadow government. This is the deep state, and it is the uniparty. They operate on behalf of the foreign occupation, not on behalf of the American people. And they're allowed to remain in place by our quote-unquote elected representatives. And the elected representatives themselves are unaccountable. And not only because of the fake elections, but because they have delegated their authorities to these totally unaccountable agencies. Okay. Trump supporters note he ran in part on shaking up and cutting the federal government. As the head of the executive branch, he has argued, he should be permitted to fire officials in the federal government at will. And that is also what the Constitution says. This court should not allow lower courts to seize executive power by dictating to the president how long he must continue employing an agency head against his will, and that is the acting Solicitor General, Sarah Harris. These are the people who argue the government's cases in front of the court. That's what the Solicitor General does. Trump is also picking a side in a much broader legal dispute over whether a president should have complete control of the executive branch or whether Congress can set up independent federal agencies and shield them from political pressure. Dellinger's case rests in part on a foundational 1935 precedent, Humphrey's Executor versus the United States, that allows Congress to require presidents to show cause, such as malfeasance, before dismissing board members overseeing independent agencies. Now, again, we just talked about how Trump is going to act in correspondence with the original Constitution, with the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, and also act in accordance with the rules as the uniparty has written them. So fine, we got to get Humphrey's Executor overturned. Okay. You need us to show cause? Well, okay. One of the proper ways we can show cause is by showing inefficiency. Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to dedicate an entire department, an entire agency on its own, to showing where the inefficiency is. And if we have shown inefficiency and the leader of the organization has not corrected for that inefficiency or has been party to that inefficiency, well, then now we've shown cause. Now, the president doesn't have to show cause, and the overturning of Humphrey's Executor will prove that. But in the meantime, we can at least show cause and show clearly all the departments of the federal government, all the agencies of the bureaucratic administrative deep state are inefficient. You want your proof, you want your cause, there's your cause. But the Supreme Court's conservatives have distanced themselves from that decision in recent years, this being Humphrey's Executor, most notably in a 2020 decision involving the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. In that case, say la law versus CFPB, the court held that protections for the head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau violated separation of powers principles. That controversial agency, originally envisioned by Elizabeth Warren, was created in response to the 2008 financial meltdown, and it has approved consumer-friendly regulations on mortgages, car loans, and credit cards. or so it says. That can't really be true because credit cards charge normal customers usurious interest rates, like 25, 30%, and even above some places. I think like the highest they go is like 32.9%. If you charge an interest rate that high, you can never get out of it by paying the minimum. You can never get out of it. The president's power to remove and thus supervise those who wield executive power flows directly from the Constitution, Chief Justice John Roberts wrote for the majority. The CFPB director has no boss, peers, or voters to report to, Roberts wrote. Yet the director wields vast rulemaking, enforcement, and adjudicatory authority over a significant portion of the U.S. economy. In a section that Dellinger has repeatedly noted in court filings, Roberts mentioned the Office of Special Counsel in his opinion, and importantly, appeared to distinguish it from the CFPB. The Special Counsel, quote, exercises only limited jurisdiction to enforce certain rules governing federal government employers and employees, Roberts wrote. It does not bind private parties at all or wield regulatory authority comparable to the CFPB. Worth noting, by the way, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has that name that makes it sound like it's there to protect consumers. It's really designed to protect consumer financial institutions, which are the banks that have consumer-facing sides like credit card companies and the places where you keep your money. The article notes that Clarence Thomas, as well as Neil Gorsuch, described the 1935 precedent as a, quote, direct threat to our constitutional structure and, as a result, the liberty of the American people. And very few things could be more obvious than that. So what happens next? What needs to happen is that they bring this thing down. If the Supreme Court agrees with the appeals court, a major question for legal observers is whether any of the justices will write opinions shedding light on their views about the merits of the case. Those opinions would provide clues about where the broader legal fight over Trump's actions is headed. The Supreme Court is closed today for President's Day. The Justice Department's appeal will likely be placed on the court's docket Tuesday, and the court could move relatively quickly, potentially handing down an order within a few days. We could see Humphrey's executor toppled, and that would be just another one of the regimes, the uniparty regimes, major levers of power. It's all being taken away. It has to be taken. It could all just be dropped away. If Trump wanted to create chaos, he would just eliminate all this stuff. Like with the wave of a hand, he would just write an executive order and say every one of these agencies and list them is hereby nullified and disbanded. And according to the Constitution, that would be just fine. Now, I don't know if the Supreme Court would go along with that. The Supreme Court would then be clearly invalidated by not even upholding the Constitution, which they have failed to do on numerous occasions. Okay. And we might have to see as part of this whole story that that branch of the government is invalidated. And whether we're going to get there or not, I don't know. We might need to form an entirely new form of government. And Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence said, after a train of these usurpations, the people have the right and the duty to throw off this form of government and bring on a new one to guarantee our security. We may get to that point. We may just be able to unwind successfully back to the constitutional era and to the founding mythology, properly represented, not as it's been represented to us. Let me take a quick peek at the chat. Everybody seems good. Okay. Let's look at Rumble for a moment. Maybe I'll have to pay some bills here. Let's pause for a second and we'll have a word. Let's pause for positive. Positive. I think I like this one because I like my dog so much. And I cannot stand doctors and I cannot stand vets because, and not all vets, hashtag not all vets, hashtag not all doctors. But vets, of course, abide by regulations put in place by the states that say they have to have all the animals that come in be up to date on their vaccinations. Otherwise, they can't be seen, even if they're in a health emergency. And that is terrible because, of course, there is no reason whatsoever to believe that the vaccine companies are not experimenting on our precious animals. And I don't know about you, but my animal is pretty precious to me. So I would like to be able to take care of that animal to the best of my ability without having to involve him or myself in the system as it exists. If you have a dog, we've all been there. Our pup goes from full of energy to sick and miserable in an instant and at the worst times. Then we're calling the vets in the middle of the night or on the weekends, trying to find a clinic that will take us in. It's a terrible way to manage our dog's health, not to mention our own stress levels and our own monthly budgets. That's why people are getting the Pet Emergency Kit by Positive. It contains critical medications and supplies that can not only keep you out of the veterinarian's office, but may even save your dog's life. Their kit contains critical medications like activated charcoal, styptic powder, and more. It might save your dog's life. Head on over to positive.com and use code STUDIO to get 15% off your Pet Emergency Kit. The QR code there is on your screen, and go check them out. Honestly, anything to provide additional health to our critters. Mine is a very tiny critter, so I think it's especially sad when tiny critters are not doing so well. And yeah, I cannot imagine taking my dog to get treated at a vet's office that would force me to inject my dog with a potentially toxic substance before bringing him in. It's unbelievable the level of cruelty that requires. It's disgusting to me. And I wish I had known the entire time because I was actually, I got my dog the shots when I first got him, and you have to do that with the people you get your dog from, or at least you did in California. And, I took him for years to get those shots. I had no idea about vaccines. But if you research animals dying after getting vaccinations or animals getting sick after vaccinations, it's all over the place. It's not a secret. It's just one of those things that is kept from us. We're told we're conspiracy theorists for even thinking it. So, man, it's tough to want to advertise any sort of pharmaceutical product. And, I know that we do that with various brands on Badlands and elsewhere. And I have considered trying to find one of those for on here. And I have mixed thoughts about it. But those medications can be really helpful. And I know that that's true because people have found them to be useful. And if they are just antidotes to counteract the poisons caused by those same pharmaceutical companies, that gets really weird. But, in a pinch where there's an actual emergency, what are you going to do? Rhodes says, what does your shirt say? It says, I heart Anons. This is merch that's on the merch site. You can find the merch site in the show notes. You can also just go to cancelcouture.com. Let's get back to business here. You guys all know how much I love the panic articles from the mainstream media. The headline on this one from CNN, paranoia seeps in to a federal workforce worried about getting fired and being watched. And of course, my highlights have disappeared. I'm going to have to find another highlighter program. Or I guess maybe just pay for the premium version of this one. But if I did that and then they still disappeared, I would be livid. As the Trump administration fires thousands of employees across the government, federal workers have another reason to be on edge. The widespread access that Elon Musk's government efficiency team has gained to agency computer systems. The sudden appearance of DOJ representatives at agencies across Washington and the Trump administration's search for federal employees it deems disloyal to the president have created a wave of anxiety among feds that their emails, texts, or conversations could be monitored. How about that? The federal government employees are worried that their communications through official channels could be monitored by the government that employs them. Isn't that strange? Now, I've mostly kept out of the kind of normie economy for my entire life, the economy that most people have to deal with. And I shouldn't use the word normie there. You're not a normie just because you work in the normie economy. But in that economy, if you work for a company and you're doing company business on a company email, you kind of understand that the people at your company have access to your email and your communications, and they can probably see your web browsing history that you use at work. And a lot of people just think, oh, well, this isn't a problem for me. And that's what these employees thought for a very long time. Some government employees are now turning off their phones at home. Others are opting for in-person chats at work rather than over Microsoft Teams. Some have even gone so far as to buy special Faraday bags designed to block electromagnetic signals in order to thwart any potential snooping. A few are printing out their employee records, including performance reviews, just in case they are deleted or altered in the federal systems. They are concerned that their own communications are going to get them removed from government because they know that they're subversive. Isn't that amazing? And by the way, are they literal tinfoil hat conspiracy theorists getting Faraday bags for their devices at work? Imagine what you would have been called as a government employee under the fake and illegitimate Biden administration for thinking that perhaps the administration was targeting conservatives. And of course, you don't have to imagine because we dealt with that for years. These people are amazing. Their concern is that with a president who talks openly of retribution against his opponents, even the most mundane of comments might be taken out of context to paint someone as anti-Trump. I used to carry my work phone around me with me everywhere, after hours, on the weekend, in case anything was needed. Now I won't take it out of my office space, said one employee at the General Services Administration. What are you doing in the rest of your time? Honestly, CNN spoke to more than a dozen communists who are upset about this. It's unclear to what extent government practices for monitoring employees have actually changed under the second Trump administration. Many programs to use both software and people to detect insider threats or unauthorized access to information ramped up during the Obama administration after a leak of government secrets by former intelligence contractor Edward Snowden. Interesting. Rumors have been rampant among federal workers that their online chats and programs like Microsoft Teams are being monitored by more senior officials, and those rumors are already changing behaviors. And worth pausing for a second and remembering that one of the key foundational theories to not only the beliefs of many Q followers, but to this podcast and much of what we do on Badlands. And you don't actually have to get this from Q, okay? If you understand the information infrastructure, and that it's possible from a very high level to capture all of everyone's information, and that the highest level of that information infrastructure would be possessed by transnational corporations and governments aligned with the global regime, and that a parallel version is being built, and that Donald Trump and various sovereign nations, leaders, militaries, whatever, our own military aligned with Trump around the world would have access to that information as well. And you understand that there are two things in opposition. Well, then one of those things is going to have their access to information cut off at a certain point, and the other will continue having all of that access to information, at least until all that information is decentralized and protected in that decentralization and inaccessible to a top-down centralizing sort of authority. So the part that comes directly from Q is we have it all. Now, people think that that means different things. It is my understanding and my belief that that phrase means this level of we have it all. They have all that information. All of your information, all of my information, all of the information is accessible. If you have all the information already, all these people are already screwed. Okay? And so is this disclosure, or is this just these communists being totally behind the times, having no idea what's happening in reality, and themselves making things continually worse because they have not given up the communism? They're only trying to hide it better. Hey, commies, we have it all. And I don't mean we by me, but, you know. The GSA has sought to dispel such rumors last week, issuing a statement that the agency has no plans to surveil employees. For some federal workers, their suspicions of surveillance are hard to shake. There is a persistent feeling that we are being watched, one Department of Veteran Affairs employee told CNN. Let's continue for just a second before we take a break. As a result, the VA employee has stopped using their work computer to look at news websites during their lunch break and is even wary of using their personal phone in the office when it's connected to Wi-Fi. They've thought about covering up the camera on their computer to avoid being watched, and they walk to the other side of the office away from their computer and speak quietly if they have to say anything that could be considered critical of the current administration. Asked if they think they are being recorded in the office, the VA employee said it is very unlikely, but is it impossible? No. I mean, did you ever think that a 19-year-old named Big Balls would be accessing information at the State Department? No, no one thought that. I also never thought you commies would be wearing 2 masks in your car to protect yourselves from a disease that doesn't exist with masks that can't protect you. But that's what happened. So, hey, commie, sorry. Now, this is what I was going to take a break to discuss. They are concerned that Elon Musk's unit, Doge, the unit with the big balls attached to it, might be monitoring their communications. Here's the thing. You work for the government. The government is supposed to be of, by, and for the people. So the government's information is actually the people's information. So it's not just that the government should have access to all that information. We all should have access to all that information. And if the FOIA process actually worked and documents weren't hidden or weren't improperly classified, I'm not sure that there is any proper classification whatsoever. But to the extent that there is, there's also information that exists in the public domain that then becomes classified so that people like this don't ever have to be subject to FOIA. All of the information on all of the government emails, all of the information these people can create and discuss in the context and scope of their job is the people's information. It should be available to all of the people at all times. All times. And if that means that you don't want to work for the federal government anymore because you think that that is too transparent and too compromising, then you don't work for the federal government anymore. And if that means that not enough people are going to work for the federal government to be able to fill these agencies with employees and get done the things that these agencies are tasked with getting done, well, that means you can't do them. And here's the problem. The same thing applies to the states. That means if you can't do those things at the state government level, well, then the state doesn't have those agencies either. And all of a sudden, just by that alone, a basic level of available oversight by the people, you can't run a big government anymore? Well, then you're shit out of luck. The idea that it could ever be anything other than that is insane. You can pretty much just close it down with that, can't you? All we got to do is get there. Can we get there? Absolutely. Can we get there on that argument alone, making that argument to the American people? I believe that we can. I believe that Donald Trump could do that. Why do we have to deal with all of the bullshit layers? Now, I'm down to be told the whole story so that we can understand why all these things are so important. Would I have had this understanding 4 years ago or 5 years ago? The answer is definitely no. Okay? So then we understand that the narrative itself is important. Well, it turns out the narrative is really the only part that's important. And if the narrative is the only part that's important, and we know that the narrative is playing out, then why are we not just focused on the narrative? People think it's impossible to get us back to the proper level of all this stuff. It's not impossible. This is yet another way that it can happen. Simply. It's not difficult. It's simple. Make the argument, win the argument of, by, and for the people. That's it. It's as simple as shall not be infringed. It's almost like there's a reason why the founders chose those words to express and protect those very principles. It's almost like they were aware of what the global regime does, what their playbook is, what their strategy is, what their agenda is. And they were attempting to thwart it. Team Smooth, $7. WTG Delivery, FYI, AGC, and Crystal, gifted total of 15 subs, in case you missed seeing. That's a lot of letters in there. Maybe there's a WTG that I missed. I have no idea. Way to go? Is it way to go? And by the way, thank you for all of those donating subscriptions. And I hope that the people out there who don't have subscriptions on Rumble will go ahead and grab them. Let's go back to our article. Some State Department employees have been informed by their superiors that Doge may have deep reach. Had to get that back up on there on the screen, sorry. Into department systems, a source familiar with the situation told CNN. Multiple department employees received a notice on their mobile phone while at work telling them, quote, your organization installed a certificate authority in your work profile. Your secure network traffic may be monitored or modified. Well, it's nice to let them know, but it should always be that way. One federal employee in Nevada is now more careful about the terms they use in Microsoft Teams messages at work. I try not to say words that might stand out if you were running a language model to find words, they said, referencing artificial intelligence. So now they are going to try to evade the new systems put in place to make sure these people are not subverting the government and trying to avoid obvious oversight. It's incredible. At the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, scientists no longer take meeting notes in Google Docs, an employee told CNN. Instead, their leaders have urged them to use offline programs such as Microsoft Word and then post online a quote-unquote clean version without any terms that might trigger a closer look, like climate change. They're going to use code words to do their work now so that they can hide their work from the oversight of the people's representatives in government. People are picking up the phone for the first time in a decade because they don't have They don't have to have online meetings or notes, the employee told CNN. We're that level of paranoid. And it's funny because CNN's earlier headline had something about them meeting in person now because they were even afraid to use their phones. So that should indicate that they are actively attempting to subvert the government and avoiding oversight so that their subversion is not recognized. It really is incredible. Also incredible how much trust they have for Google and Microsoft. What does that say about Google and Microsoft? Strange world we're in, is it not? These commies are crazy. By the way, please tell me in the Rumble chat, put up a 1 if you can see me clearly. Put up a 2 if you cannot, because I need to know whether or not the way that I'm directing things through Rumble Studio is causing the feed to diminish in any way. Okay. Everybody's saying 1. Okay, well, that's good. Okay, good. All right, so I'm not blurry. Well, that is reassuring, because on my end of the Rumble Studio, I look a bit blurry. Everybody's happy. Okay, thank you, everybody. Somebody said, but pretty dark. Well, it's the normal amount of dark. I'm here. There's lights shining on my face. You know, if the lights are any shinier, then it's like really, I don't know if you ever have lights shining in your face. It's not always the most comfortable thing, especially not for 3 hours. So I'm not trying to hide. Damn. So many things to talk about, and so little time. We're not ultimately going to get there, but I'll do one more before we leave. I was going to talk about some of the court stuff. I don't know that we need to talk about that. Those are developing. And then the gold stuff is very interesting. The potential for Elon Musk to be Elon Musk, he's basically just doing narrative disclosure. Part of We Have It All is that they already have all this information that Elon and Doge are quote unquote finding out right now and releasing to the public. All good. All good. It's a wonderful narrative device. I've always been very supportive of that. Even when Vivek Ramaswamy was going to be part of Doge, now he's just going to run for Ohio governor. J.D. Vance's best friend. People are like, why are you so concerned about J.D. Vance? Well, because his best friend is Vivek Ramaswamy. He just named his kid after Vivek Ramaswamy. Also, his owner is Peter Thiel. Why wouldn't I be concerned about that guy? Also, Mike Pence. Are you concerned about Mike Pence? What was Mike Pence's position? Vice president? Was it worth having a more watchful eye over Mike Pence the entire time? Now, maybe. Now, Mike Pence might still be a good guy, so I'm not worried about that. I'm just making sure that we take both positions so that we can understand things from multiple perspectives, which increases our likelihood. It creates a lot more work, and it doesn't mean that it means we can't go out and cheerlead every day, as basically all the truther shows devote all their time to now. It's getting really ridiculous out there. Oh, look what Trump's doing. He's winning again. Yeah, I know he's winning. Do you want to understand anything? Are we still focused on the awakening, or did that already happen now that more people are watching Ben Shapiro? Crazy. What are the priorities? What are the priorities? I don't understand it. Oh, we're just cheerleading every day. You're not cheerleading hard enough. Yeah, I'm the infiltrator because I'm not cheerleading hard enough. Not the guys making money for cheerleading like everyone else on Twitter is. It's not that. It's not that. We're winning. Yeah, I know we're winning. I say it every day. Hey, by the way, supporting Donald Trump isn't supporting everyone he's ever said something nice about. Trusting Donald Trump isn't believing it's true every time he says something. Yeah. We're not gonna go any more into that at any more depth today. I want to. This name is coming up again. So we talked about this guy a little bit last year. I can't remember exactly when, sometime last fall. We talked about this attorney named Mark Zaid or Zaid or whatever. And he keeps coming back up. Keeps coming around again and again and again. Ah, damn it. I forgot to play the Keith Kellogg video from earlier. Anyhow, on Saturday, Keith Kellogg, in this meeting of Europeans, this little panel, he said, like, no, of course, we're just going to make these decisions on our own. No, we're not going to include our European allies. That's ridiculous. And then Lil Marco said the opposite. So who's right? Guess we shall see. So apologies for skipping over that. We did discuss that on Devolution on Saturday. So if you'd like to see that, you can go back there. If you'd like to see the video, you can go to t.me/ very reasonable and just search, use the little magnifying glass icon in the Telegram channel. And if you're on the phone, you can just hit the three little dots at the top and then find the little magnifying glass and just type in Kellogg and you'll find the video in no time. Sometimes people worry that I'm not putting all the links in the show notes. t.me/ very reasonable and then use the little spyglass. The keyword search on Telegram is amazing. That is the best information app by far. You'll find it quickly and you can watch the video there. Anyhow, let's get back to this Mark Zaid or Zaid video from sometime late last year. Here we are.
Much for being with us. And this is kind of a little bit of a separate subject, although tangentially related to what Kate was just talking about there. But you are advising clients who are worried about retribution from the incoming Trump administration, revenge. And I was reading an article where you said you are counseling some people to leave the country. Why?
Well, look, Donald Trump and those in his inner circle have been very clear over the period of time, and especially during the campaign, that they do intend to retaliate, and they do intend to retaliate swiftly. They've made those promises. He said that he intends to have his second administration one that fulfills promises. So it would be naive and foolish for us not to take any of this seriously. And we're preparing. Now, I've represented a lot of clients who have been specific targets of President Trump and those around him. We're not just talking about my federal employee workers in different agencies who are uncomfortable like you've just heard in this last segment. We're talking about people who have been specifically called out by the former president of the United States. And we're not rushing to it. I'm not saying sell your home, move overseas, never come back, become an expat. I'm telling certain clients, a small number, that, you know what, take a vacation for inauguration and let's see what happens in the days or week or two afterwards.
What do you think he could do? What form would retribution, retaliation, revenge take in your mind?
Well, it can vary depending on, obviously, the individuals. It could be as harsh as criminal prosecution. I mean, you yourself and your network are potentially vulnerable. How many times have you done a story on classified information and it being leaked? Well, under the Espionage Act, that's prosecutable. The only reason why it hasn't happened previously is that the norm of the Justice Department has been not to prosecute journalists. There will be no norms that are in the second Trump administration. So we're preparing for all this. It could be tax audits like we saw back in the Nixon administration. It could be terminations like your last discussion was about. It could take the form of civil penalties. I mean, there is a whole host of usage of laws, not even abuse of laws, but the use of laws in a way that hasn't been typical or perhaps extreme that people could fall victim to. Again, it's just preparation.
That clip keeps going. Again, you can just type in ZAID in the Telegram search bar, t.me/very reasonable, and you can find that video. So he's worried that Donald Trump is going to use the legal system that people like him have set up and he's going to use it against them. That's what he's saying in no uncertain terms. And I think that that's what we're seeing, and that's wonderful. Donald Trump acts in a way that corresponds to the original Constitution, the spirit and letter of the law, and in a way that conforms to the system as they've constructed it for themselves, to advantage themselves. So he's going to use their levers of power and the true levers of power. And obviously, he's never going to use their levers of power in a way that conflicts with the original Constitution. And that is the difference between the two of them. So Trump has to take more time, more effort, more energy. It's more work. It's more well thought out because he has a harder course to navigate. The system was set up to advantage others, right? It's basically like the way the regime, I know that looked weird, like I was like coming out of a shell or something. It's basically the way that the communists describe a black person getting into Harvard, right? All the privileges for people of, well, now it's backwards, but they would describe, oh, you got to navigate all these other things because this other privileged class is able to do it the easy way. Well, Mark Zaid is part of that privileged class, and people like him set up all of those privileges. Now they're not in power anymore, so it's going to be used against them. That's what he's scared of. Now, the New York Times, and this will probably be the last piece that we do today, this amazing New York Times piece. Let me get to that actually in just a second. Let's take one more quick break here. I haven't done this one before, but maybe we'll like it. We'll see, especially because Rumble is starting this new sticker thing. And as I said the other day, gotta love supporting Rumble. So we'll do this, then we'll get into the home stretch. This is Sticker Pack. Are you ready to show your support in style? Sticker Mule has a fantastic offer just for you. For a limited time, you can grab free Trump stickers. Yes, you heard that right. Free. Whether you want to decorate your laptop, car, or office space, these high-quality, durable stickers are perfect for making a statement. Just imagine how great they'll look and how super easy they are to apply. Here's how it works. Head on over to stickerpackpac.com, sign up and claim your free stickers, and watch the fun unfold. I've never seen fun unfold, so watching that will be a new experience to me. Don't miss out on this exclusive offer. Stock is limited, so act fast, spread the word, and let your voice be heard with Sticker Mule's awesome stickers. Once again, visit stickerpack.com today and grab your free Trump stickers before they're gone. You can hit that QR code on the side. And also the Sticker Mule thing is like a new feature on Rumble. And I think I'm going to figure out how to put maybe some Rumble exclusive merch there, which is different than what you can find on cancelcouture.com. But man, if you haven't gone over there, there's tons of different stuff. And so if you want to rep the show, support the show or my work or whatever, or get some of these designs, head on over there, cancelcouture.com or cancelcouture.myspreadshop.com. And let's get back to the New York Times. Look at Mark Zaid right there. Thoughtful guy. Trump targets a growing list of those he sees as disloyal. Isn't that a beautiful, beautiful article? This is when you know that the person pictured in the article is going to get just overwhelmingly great treatment. And the last time we saw something like this, I have to make this joke. The last time we saw that on this here podcast was just last week with this article right here. Hold for processing. Look at this wonderful PR piece. Oh, who's that? It's Charlie Kirk in the pages of the New York Times. How Charlie Kirk became the youth whisperer of the American right. Charlie Kirk is whispering to your kids. All right, Mark Zaid. The lawyer Mark Zaid has represented a wide array of whistleblowers, both Republicans and Democrats, during multiple administrations. But it was his involvement with the whistleblower at the center of the first impeachment case against President Trump that drew the president's ire. While at a wedding last weekend, Mark Zaid learned through an interview Mr. Trump gave to the New York Post that his security clearance would be revoked, a move that could jeopardize his ability to represent officials who worked on classified matters. He still has received no formal notification or explanation. Weird situation, isn't it? An attorney like that, an obvious member of the deep state and its protective class and its privileged class, has a security clearance so that he can defend officials who mishandled classified information. And that's exactly what he was talking about in that interview with CNN. And he suggested it could even be journalists because they accepted and then disseminated leaked information, leaked classified information from their unknown sources, the sources whose names were protected for anonymity. And of course, we're going to be told that Donald Trump is going to go after whistleblowers because he's going after the special counsel's office who protects whistleblowers. So you can see the real elements of this and how important it is to deal with these situations individually and in terms of the unwinding so that we can get rid of Humphrey's executor and get things back to proper oversight in a functional government, not this sprawling bureaucratic administrative state in the deep state. And you can also see the narrative seeding for how they are going to attack Donald Trump's legitimacy in going after these issues and these people. Oh, by the way, great quote here. I'm doing the same thing I've done since the day I set foot in Washington, D.C. 32 years ago. All I do is hold the administration, whoever that is, Republican or Democrat, accountable for unlawful and ethical lapses. Isn't that amazing? I'm doing exactly what I've done for 32 years. So for 32 years, you have represented the deep state, and now you want everybody to give you credit for it. That is really something. I love these commies. They just think that everybody sides with them. They have used these emotional pleas and these pleas toward some underlying principle of fairness and accountability to convince the American people of the inversion, the total inversion within the false reality. And he's speaking to that now, even though it's collapsed. Mr. Zaid is on what has become an ever-growing list of President Trump's perceived enemies. Through the first month of his administration, Mr. Trump and his allies have carried out a campaign of revenge and retribution that has little analog in American history. He has pulled protective details, blah, blah, blah. Asked why he was going after security clearances of Mr. Biden and others, Mr. Trump was characteristically blunt. Why don't they just say honest? Because they want to pretend that somehow it's not true, but it is true. These are people that we don't respect. If there are people that we thought were breaking the law, came very close to it in previous years, we do it. And they are doing that. Mr. Trump's efforts have extended beyond high-profile individuals and stretched down into the lower ranks of government and media. His administration fired the Inspector General for the U.S. Agency for International Development, that's USAID, after he issued a critical report about the impact of the administration's freeze on foreign aid and moves to dismantle the agency. So a bureaucrat who operates at the pleasure of the president tried to undermine the president's executive authority in order to maintain his agency and the agency's function in disseminating foreign aid to infiltrate and overthrow foreign governments on behalf of the global regime that occupies and has occupied the United States government. Incredible. a top Justice Department official appointed by Mr. Trump, said the department would investigate prosecutors who refused to dismiss corruption charges against Mayor Eric Adams of New York. So these prosecutors that were already being let go, as would happen when a new administration comes in, there is now this total non-controversy being made into a controversy by the media that the DOJ has said, we are not going to pursue charges. The U.S. attorneys in New York are not going to pursue charges. Therefore, the charges must be dropped. They're like, we're resigning. You're asking us to do something that's against our principles. Well, you were going to be gone 5 days later anyway. And why would you be allowed to continue prosecuting the case? The case seems to be bullshit. Mr. Trump and his advisor, Elon Musk, have attacked journalists by name, with Mr. Musk recently calling for the firing of a Wall Street Journal reporter who revealed that an employee of his cost-cutting team had posted racist comments. Ridiculous. The White House had blocked Associated Press journalists from the Oval Office and Air Force One because the wire service is using the name Gulf of Mexico rather than Mr. Trump's preferred term, Gulf of America. That's just hilarious. We're in uncharted waters. At Mr. Trump's direction, his aides, and I'm skipping down if you're just listening to the audio, so apologies. At Mr. Trump's direction, his aides have begun a large-scale investigation into federal prosecutors and agents who investigated cases against pro-Trump rioters who stormed the Capitol on January 6, 2021. And he has said he intends to strip the security clearances of prosecutors who investigated him and lawyers who played a role in his two impeachments. And why wouldn't he? You would have to believe that everything was above board the entire time. And of course, it wasn't. Conservative groups picking up on Mr. Trump's penchant for retribution have rallied around the theme. One nonprofit posted the names and photos of more than 50 federal workers on what it is calling a watch list related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, asking President Trump to fire them. Many of the targets are black workers at health agencies. Oh, really? Wait a second. I want to see, including one called a deep state target list. I really want to know what these influential right-wing circles are doing. One of these was attributed to General Flynn and Ivan Raiklin, and I don't see why we would equate General Flynn and Ivan Raiklin. And no offense, obviously, to either of them, but give me a break. And the DEI watch list is from the American Accountability Foundation. This was, I want to find out who runs this, because this sounds like one of those things where they can get their controlled opposition and infiltrators to do this sort of thing that then becomes a controversy for the Trump administration when it's not actually the Trump administration initiating that controversy to the extent that it is a controversy. So the American Accountability Foundation, founded in 2020, Tom Jones and Matthew Buckham. I've never heard of either of these people. Money from the Conservative Partnership Institute, money from the Heritage Foundation, an association with Project 2025, we are told, and they are responsible for this DEI watch list. Let's see who this Tom Jones character is. Legislative director for Ron Johnson, ran opposition research for Ted Cruz's presidential campaign in 2016. Ooh. Policy advisor to Jim DeMint. Haven't heard that name in a while. And the AAF is currently under IRS investigation and is described as a dark money group that does not disclose its donors. So that's kind of interesting. I wouldn't give too much credence to this DEI stuff, this DI target list. Could be, I'm not trying to cast aspersions on these people because I don't know about them. Just saying this is something to watch for. They pulled together all sorts of lists that had our names on them, on it, Zaid said. So they're just going through the list. One of those targeted is Norm Eisen, a former ambassador who worked with House Democrats on Mr. Trump's first impeachment. A lawyer, Mr. Eisen now represents FBI agents who worked on the January 6th investigation, who are suing the Department of Justice to block their public identification amid Mr. Trump's scrutiny of their work. So they are the evil twin within the FBI, and the director of Color Revolutions, Norm Eisen, is representing them to help make sure that the public can't find out who they are. Unbelievable, these people. Mr. Eisen is also part of a team of lawyers fighting Elon Musk, Mr. Trump's ally. He views Trump's actions against him as a sign that he is on the right path. I take it as a backhanded compliment, and it's going to encourage additional activity on my part, he said. So prepare for many more lawsuits. Oh, Norm Eisen, when he talks tough, he just sounds so tough. Norm Eisen, as tough as they come. All right. We're getting close to getting out of here. Let's do one last quick ad. This is Rumble Premium. Oh, wait. Apparently it's not. It's not going to work. I guess it's not going to work. Well, if we can't do it, we can't do it. All right. Well, we'll forget about them. We had a couple more Rumble rants to get to, and then we will get ourselves out of here. Julie Beans gifted a subscription in the chat, so someone grab that. Polymath, $17. 17 on the 17th on President's Day. Love you, man, and your work. No homo. No homo accepted. I would have never thought homo. Snowcat Operator, $17. Following suit from Polymath Anon and Julie Bean, $17. Same as Snowcat Operator and Polymath Anon. So thank you all very much. And with that, I will see paid subscribers to the Substack for the subscriber stream on Wednesday. And guys, I got to say this. I know that people are fine with not doing Q&A in the Substack chat because they just do Q&A in the Rumble chat, or the Substack comments, I should say, because they do Q&A in the Rumble chat during these live streams, and all good. But because I only do the show 3 days a week now rather than 5 days a week, there are occasionally like stories of the day that I'll just kind of miss completely in favor of doing kind of the more like drawn out survey of an entire issue rather than a multitude of issues that happen on a given day. So if you think that there's stuff that I missed that you want me to hit, please go ahead and put that in those Q&A comments on the Substack posts when they come out for the subscriber stream. And maybe that's the day we do that stuff. Just an idea. Do it if you want. If you don't do it, all good. So 3 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday for the subscriber stream for paid subscribers on Substack. And then I'll be back Friday with a free public stream. And so either way, same reasonable time, same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns never did work, but they told us to do it anyway. And they told us that Joe Biden was president. And come on. Joe Biden was never president. And with that, we will be back again very soon.
Well, what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
Ah!
And what's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
Can we stop this cruel game and allow the boy to keep one shred of dignity? For God's sakes! I can't stand to see him in all this pain! You vicious bastards! Let him move in with you! Is it so bad to see somebody happy? So just let him move in! For the love of God, let the boy move in with you! Good Lord!
And I will not let you down.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What? In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.